like double shifts today
Yeah.
or
I was
coming
just
in
waiting 'cause they,
later.
like, it takes too long to show up. I'm just gonna start the recording and
Yeah.
go ahead and. All right. So the first thing I was gonna say is that everyone, whoever's watching this, or Brian, since you're in already, is that I adjusted the budget sheet we were looking at from Studio Binder. I tried to look through everything and like fix the different formulas to make sure they were capturing all the different information. And I also went ahead and made some help sheets just to like kind of explain the things that I knew and what you would put in each location, in each area. And I sent all that through an email with a scene that we wrote for the storyboard for the storyboard exercise that we did in like semester 3, I think. So we're gonna use that same scene, and I put inside of the email, I was saying like go ahead and just make a guess of how many days it would be, even though you would really want to like do some research into the shooting schedule for it if you're actually gonna make it, of course. But since this is more about the budget, you just make like a guess if you think it's going to take 1, 2, 3 days, 5 days, however many days you think it might take to shoot. Go ahead and put that in, but that will determine how many days your shoot is, and you'll put it in under the shoot days, and then you'll put in all of these other elements, and the cost of the crew and the cost of the cast will go up depending on how many extra days you have. So the shooting schedule for this exercise doesn't really matter. The main point of this exercise is just to get an idea of the different costs that things are, and like actually looking up around your area how much that kind of stuff would cost for you. Even contacting people through like Facebook or production crew websites to say, hey, I'm trying to build a budget. What would your rates be if you were to work on a project for 3 days? And then like just start to get some ideas and ask a few people, see what they say, and then you can start to really actually see how much things might cost even in your area. And then, like I said, I put the things under stuff I knew. Some stuff I didn't know what it was exactly, what it meant, so I left it blank, or it was just obvious what it means, so I left it blank. And everything else I tried to just leave a little comment or a big comment on like what it might be, or what you would probably want to put there. And then I just left like the example of what it does whenever you're putting these different pieces of information in and what they mean for each column. So I sent all that through an email, and that will be our third exercise that is due February 28th. So now we have 3 exercises due on February 28th. That's why I was saying everybody start earlier than a week before or something, because then you have 3 to do if you are planning to participate in all of them. It'll be a little more hectic trying to get them all done in 1 week, but it's still able to be done if you have time for it. So I just wanted to point that out first. I tried to clean it up. This is by Studio Binder, so they're the ones who made the template. I just kind of fixed it and moved a few things around and edited a few things to the way I think it should be, and added a help sheet for like just explaining some stuff of what it could mean and what you're supposed to do in each area. But it is by Studio Binder, so I don't take credit for making the template itself. Anyway, with that said, we can go ahead and move on to what we have tonight. And tonight we're talking about editing softwares, monitors, both camera monitors and editing monitors, like a computer monitor for editing, and parallel editing, and the technique used in editing and what that is and what it means and what's the difference between that and cross-cutting. So the first thing we're talking about is editing softwares. And this is by Stuart and Alina. This information comes from them, and it's Video A and editing softwares, best video editing software 2021. We're in 2022 right now, but I mean, it's not too much has changed since we're still in the beginning of the year. So the first thing you should do when you're thinking of which software you need is to determine two main things. What are you needing to use it for? What do you need it to do? And what can you afford for your budget? Some softwares are free. Some cost between around $50 to $200, and that's like in the mid-range. And some can cost $300 to $400, or they have monthly subscriptions and they are never fully owned. So those are the most expensive ones and the more professional ones. We're going to be talking more about the more professional ones just because there's more to them. I'll go into like why you might want a cheaper one and why you might want a free one, and just go through some of those pros and cons of these different ones that we've heard from other people, and then get input from everyone else on anything they've used. So right now we're looking at Avid Media Composer. That's up on the screen. So the thing you'll notice, first of all, whenever you're looking at a lot of these different editors, is they all pretty much have the same or very similar layouts. You have if you look at the top left of this image, you can see that's where the import area is, where they have the imported media and the different bins for what that media is, whether it's audio or video or some kind of mask or some element that they've added to the image or to the video or to the audio. And you can find all that on the top left. Then you have your actual viewing screen or screens. One of them is you view a clip that you're selected on. So you double click it and it opens up in the viewing window on the left or the right, depending on how you have it set up. And then the other viewing window actually shows wherever the point is on the timeline. So it shows like what you're actually viewing live and what you are viewing when you click on it. So you can do a few different edits. Also, whenever you're doing things like the like rate stretch, or you're using rolling edit where it's affecting more than one clip, then those two windows will show you one, it'll show you both clips at once. It'll show you the clip before and the clip after and how they're getting affected and where they're going to start and end after you do your edit. And those are those two things. And those will be in pretty much the majority of the editors you'll see. The next layer below that is, it's not really on the cheaper end as much, or at least there's definitely not as much capability there, but that is stuff for color grading. And obviously the higher end ones have a lot more capability when it comes to color grading. I don't even know how much color grading the like very low end or the free editors have, if they have any. But that would be that. But that's not in every single workflow. That's just because they have that color grading open right now. And then below that, you'll see that there's the timeline that has all the clips and the audio clips and how they're stacked. And that shows if you have the video on top of another one, the video on top is going to be the one that you see when you're watching the video. And then you decide where to make those edits and what images or what clips you want over each other. If you're adding a title, that will be on top of the video so that it can be seen. Otherwise, the video will be on top of the title, and the title won't be able to be viewed. Same thing with, not the same thing actually. With audio, it's different. Audio just, you can layer as many and it doesn't have any priority of one over the other. It just, you want multiple tracks to be able to have audio have layers so that there's more depth to the sound effects, or you have a track just for dialogue, you have a track just for sound effects of a certain type, track for music, things like that, because there's so much different audio and music going on that you want to have multiple tracks to be able to do that. So audio is a bit different, but you'd still want the multiple tracks for it. But yeah, so you'll see all these things in generally every editor. You might not see that middle part that has the color grading, but you will see the viewing screen, the imports, and the timeline where you actually make the edits. And that's pretty much the standard across the board, even on the free ones. So they can all do the basic editing stuff. If we look at Media Composer here, then you can see whenever the color grading is gone, this is opened up. And some editors will have more, you'll have a capability to move stuff around to your liking, and some are kind of locked in place where it doesn't allow you to like move the different sections to where you want. And some people really want that, some people don't. Doesn't really affect anything. You can still find all the elements. It just might take a bit longer. You have to look in different places to find them if you're not able to edit it to your liking. But we'll get into that in a minute. Pretty much, I just wanted to point out that all of these editors can do the basic editing stuff. They can all cut the clips. They can all add audio pieces. They can all, you'll be able to view it while you're editing it. And especially when you get into the higher end editors, they do a lot of the same functions. They just do them a bit differently, or they excel at like one specific thing, or they're just like, their layout and the way they work is a bit different and it's to certain people's liking. So usually when you get into the higher end of things on editing, they all have a lot of the same functionality. It just comes down to preference of what people like about one over the other. And they're not really too different. They might be different in the way you have to like work with them and the way they're laid out and what the things are named and where you find them. But all of the functionality and the things you can do with them are pretty similar across the board. Another thing about Avid is it is the industry standard for editing right now, but it's not really easy to find information on it when you're looking up like tutorials or like what I did this week was I looked up like different editors versus different ones. So it'd be like Final Cut versus Adobe Premiere Pro versus Davinci Resolve, but they don't really have as many videos on Avid versus anything. So I don't know what to really say about that, but I just know there's not as many tutorials and things like that for you to learn Avid as there are these other more commonplace amongst people that aren't high professionals. Those types of editors, those you'll find a lot more tutorials and stuff on, like for free on YouTube. But Avid is the industry standard right now. But it's kind of, I would say that like Adobe and Final Cut used to be this industry standard, and then Avid took over. But it's kind of a balance between those two, and Premiere started like taking off to capture some of that attention, as well as DaVinci Resolve. It's starting to come into its own, even though it's known more for color grading.
Final Avid has always been on top, or what's the word you say, industry standard. It's kind of like it meets the criteria to be considered professional, but Avid has always been like the top tier. And then Final Cut 7 was introduced, and that kind of like became very popular because it was Apple products. People liked Apple products. And then what was the other thing? It was more Final Cut was more for the independent side. So people were kind of like jumping ship to that. And then Final Cut X came out and people hated it. So like they hated it so much because Premiere had always been around, but people kind of just ignored it because Adobe always had Adobe was popular for Photoshop and After Effects. That was it. Like nobody paid any attention to Premiere Pro at all. And then Final Cut X happened, and they're like, well, they have Adobe has their own editor, and everybody jumped ship to that. And then now everybody's jumping ship to DaVinci. I bring this up a lot, but everybody's it's annoying because it's like this everybody, it's kind of like a social media platform where we started off with MySpace, then we went to Facebook, and then now it's Instagram, TikTok, and all these other platforms. So everybody's just going to keep jumping ship, and it just gets frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like Brian's saying, a lot of the names Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, and Avid Media Composer are on the higher end, but they're also the more pricey side of things, or the subscriptions. Filmora X, Power Director 19, Premiere Elements are some of the cheaper ones, around like $60 to $100. And they have the basic editing functions. They just don't have as much functionality to them. They don't have as many things that they can do as these other ones. DaVinci Resolve also has a free version. Imovie is free, and Windows Movie Maker. There's some of the free editors you'll find. There's also one that I used to use called VideoPad or VideoPad Pro. I can't remember the name, but it's VideoPad. And they had a free version, and then they also had like a non-free version. I think Filmora also does that. They just have an annoying thing. I'm actually going to go to theirs. One thing that's annoying if you're trying to get the free version of Filmora, which this is the look of Filmora. As you can see, it still has the viewing window. It has the editing thing down here, the timeline, and it would have the clips or the effects up here in the top left, just like with these other ones. And if you look at this picture of it, you can see that showing you these different titles and these different things. And usually, like you'll find on the lower end or the mid-tier editors, they're more for YouTube or travel videos and things like that. So they actually might have more titles and unique effects for those kinds of things for like YouTube video type stuff. Whereas the higher end editors are more geared towards like film and television and things that don't really use these pop-up effects and these transitions as much as you'd see in like a YouTube video or travel video or corporate video or something like that. So if you are trying to do YouTube videos and stuff like that, you might want to look into the different effects and different stuff that some of these cheaper ones have, because they might have more unique styled titles and graphics that the other ones don't, unless you really want to take a lot of time working on it through their program. So that's something to look into. But with Filmora, if you have the free trial version, if you can see on the left, it's a bit blurry, but they add a watermark, which means that if you're editing and you export from their thing in the free version, then it has this this little title of theirs saying that it was made by their editor right on the video the whole time through. And so that can be very annoying, and obviously it's ugly. So usually, I mean, I would say it's not really free. I would say the free version is basically just to get you to get familiar with it, see if you like it, and then see if it exports well and how fast it renders. And then the full version is like the real one where you have to pay for it, which I think it's like $70, $80, something like that. Might be 100, I don't know, but it's somewhere in that range. But yeah, so if you do find free versions, because there are some that have free versions and full versions, and they're like the middle tier ones, kind of like this, and the free version of it might have something like very, very limited export capabilities. Like it might not be able to export to many different codecs or anything, to where you can basically only export it to a very small resolution so that you can just get a sense of the edit. And then the full version will allow you to have all of the unlocked capabilities of the different editing or the different exports that it can do. Or it'll do something like Filmora, where it'll have a watermark for your exports. So if you see a free version of something, just double check, see why it's free, if it actually is free like all the way, or if it's going to have some stuff like that or some missing capabilities that you really want when you're reading about that particular editing software. Of course, starting with the free ones, you're going to have the least amount of options. And while all the editors can have that basic cutting, organizing footage, exporting, as well as basic transitions and effects, you need to determine what features you might need as well, because not all of them are going to have stuff like chroma keying, which is green screen keying out the green screen, advanced transitions, motion tracking, customizable titling, graphics, and all the different features, audio effects, video effects that are in these higher end editors. So you want to look into that, see what they actually have, and see if it's worth it. Of course, it's free, so you could always just take it, try it out, and see what it can do. And if you don't like it, get rid of it, delete it off your computer. But it's just something to keep in mind if you are looking into trying to really dive in. One of the good things about free options is that they are usually the most basic. So they're usually the easiest to start understanding. Imovie is known for being very, very easy for the user experience, and it's free, but only for Mac users. And you have Windows Movie Maker, which you don't really hear as often because it's not as good. I would say it's not as good. I haven't used it in a long time, but so maybe they've updated it very well, but it isn't really as well known or as used for a free version of an editor as the iMovie Maker, or iMovie, I mean. The Windows Movie Maker is there though. So if you have a PC, you can try it out and see if you like it and see if you want to use it. But if you have a Mac and a PC, then just go with iMovie because it's more intuitive, it's a little bit faster, and it has a few more options. So that's just something. But they have very simplistic timelines and overall workflow, overall workstation. So you can see like there's not too much going on. You don't have to, it's not too much of a learning curve. There's still going to be a lot there, but if you're going to use a free version, or if you're going to use an entirely free thing like iMovie or Windows Movie Maker, they're going to be the most basic, so they're going to be the most easy to learn. And then because they're free, if you want to try them out, get used to editing, and then if you like it and you feel like you need to upgrade, then you can have a better idea of these different functions and what they do and if you need them or not. As you're working, you might be able to find that, oh man, I wish I could do this. And then you find out that it's in one of these other editors, and you figure out that you need to buy that one, or that you would like to, so that you can have that function. So that's a good reason to get it a free one, especially if you're new to editing. However, there is one that everyone points out. I pointed it out, but I have seen why, especially why Brian brought up like that. It's very complex. There's a steep learning curve to this because it is DaVinci Resolve has a free version, and just because it's free, it doesn't mean that it's as simple or as easy as those other two. It takes away some of the functionality of the full version, but it still has a huge amount of capability and flexibility and things you can do within it. And it's like an all-in-one package. And there's a lot you can do, but it is a very steep learning curve, even for people who have been editing. I've heard that they go on to this, and it's a very different workflow and the way it's set up, especially for color grading and things like that. They use something called node mode, which if you look at this picture right here, you can see in the top right, there are these little boxes. So instead of the timeline in this instance, the timeline that we see in other editors, kind of like Adobe, has these effects that stack on top of each other. But where is it at? But in DaVinci, we have like this nodes that go from left to right. So it is a bit different. It is a bit more, it's a different mindset to have to see what's happening and see how it's happening at the same time. And it's not as user-friendly as something like a regular timeline, because timelines have been used since the beginning of digital editing, pretty much. Like they've been around the whole time. So everyone's more used to that and seeing that. And it just makes sense that if I put this on top of that, it's going to appear on top of it. Compared to if I put it on the left and right of it, it's going to be in different areas of the, it's going to be on different layers pretty much. It's still going to be on layers sort of, I think, but it's just going to be in a different setup. So it's just a bit different to figure out and learn.
Also, this version of DaVinci you're showing right now is it's like an older version, like when the Blackmagics first introduced their cameras. Like as I mentioned
That's
before,
what about this one?
Yeah, the new one looks, has a time. They made the look more like an editor because they knew people were jumping ship. Like I had mentioned, they're jumping ship from Premiere to DaVinci. So they were like, okay, let's go ahead and change up the template to make it look more like an editor, even though it's supposed to be a color grading software that has
Mhm.
the ability to edit. So they're smart. They're being very smart about it. And I think Priscilla was going back and forth trying to figure out like why they would give their editing software for free. I saw a video of it. This guy was trying to figure out, and he has a theory that it's mainly a ploy to get people to buy the camera, because nowadays like the
Hey,
industry.
that's what I was saying. It's gonna be temporary. One day they're not gonna be free anymore. When the camera finally like takes off for good and it becomes more of an industry standard. And
Well, the camera has already taken off for. I
I
mean,
know,
but
but you know what I mean. Like I feel like they're doing it for self promo, basically.
well, they don't. Here's the thing: they don't need the software because
They
like
don't need
Lakota,
it, but it's a good way to get more people.
they have the softwares for a specific reason, because they started off like that's their thing. They're a color grading company in Australia. That is their bread and butter right there. And then they make broadcasting equipment and stuff like that. So when they decided they were going to make cameras, because they were kind of like me. They were like, oh man, we make all this color grading software. Why don't we make a camera that's that complements the software and stuff like this. So that was their idea. But like Lakota was saying about Avid, there's not that many tutorials for Avid, and the reason why is because Avid is supposed to be the, this, this high class editor. So like back in the day, like before, the internet was being used the way it was, you couldn't just there's a thing called prosumer and consumer. Prosumer being, I'm a professional, I'm a pro, and you couldn't just go into Best Buy. And like I had mentioned in a couple meetings before, Best Buy has gotten really good at providing more better products for filmmaking. But before, it's like, you wanted to be a filmmaker, what gear did you get? You were only limited to what you can get at Best Buy or at Target and stuff like that, and they just didn't have all the consumer stuff. So in order to get like really professional grade gear, you had to order it from whatever company, and it was like you had to find that company. You couldn't just go, and because it was really hard to find and get your hand on. And just so happens that Avid was like one of those things. Your only knowledge of Avid is if you worked at a news studio or a production company. They were the only ones that, because they had a contract with these companies. So that's how they knew. But it wasn't like you could go, and it's still that way. So that's why there's not too much stuff on Avid, because they Avid is looking at it as, we don't need to sell to people. We have all these companies that buy our product and use them to make movies and stuff like that. We don't need to flaunt or flex or do anything like that. Adobe and all those other companies, they're the ones that are fighting hard to get your dollar. But Avid is like, we're fine where we are, because we have all these news. They have all the every new NBC, ABC, all those channels. They use Avid. So like Avid is kind of sitting. Well, Avid and what's the other one? Avid and they have the audio software too, but they're sitting kind of comfy right now.
Pro
And it's the
Tools.
same. Yeah, Pro Tools. It's the same thing for DaVinci. DaVinci was like that too. Like, only way you knew about DaVinci is if you were a professional colorist, like that. But when they decided to start making cameras, they're like, well, how are we going to get people to buy these cameras? Well, let's just give them the software, as a plus, as an additive. And then they did that. But now it's like, they really don't need to sell it. You know what I mean? Because, it's kind of like, with the same thing with Avid, is like they've already established themselves on that market, and it's already been handed out for free to so many people. It's kind of pointless to go back and say, oh, we're going to start charging people when you have so many people that have a copy of it already. You know what I mean? Like, you're not gonna make that money back. You're just not. But
Yeah, I get it.
yeah, so that's the reason why, like, because they just didn't need the software. They were like, we have it, it's great, but we'd rather people buy these cameras than to buy the software. You know what I mean? Because they're always gonna, we're always gonna upgrade the cameras and stuff. The software, on the other hand, people keep
So what you're
jumping
saying,
ship.
they got to a point where they're comfortable enough and in their in that aspect and they want to promote another aspect. So it's not as much of a financial loss for them, and they think that this is a good way. So it is in a way still promotion in a way. It's not promo as in like buy our stuff. It's just more like here's an extra incentive, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, because it's kind of like a grocery store that offers a free item if you come in that day, just so they get you in there, and then they go, all right, now buy more stuff. You know, because you're more likely to buy the stuff after you get in there than just get that one thing and leave.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I would say the other thing is they also have the paid version. So I guess if they get you into the free version and you like it enough, then you might be you might be more inclined to buy the premium version to get all of the features. Because I think there's some of the features of the coloring that aren't in the free version that still does a huge crap ton of stuff for coloring with the free version, but it's just like the more professional stuff.
I haven't run into any limitations with the exception of being able to upload certain codecs, and that was it. Like I think there's like a specific like Red Raw or something you have to upgrade, and then you have to upgrade to it, which is I see what they're doing, because like now, you know, if you're getting clients and they have like red footage and you can't edit it, I see they're looking at it as like, we want to get money from, the big players as opposed to the independent or little guys. So,
Right.
But the only limitations I've seen so far is this, the ability to use the codec. So the DaVinci you're getting, this DaVinci Lite, it's pretty much a solid editor. Like it's pretty, yeah. It sounds crazy. Like I've been wondering this whole time, what is the catch? What is it that I cannot do on the software? And I still haven't run into any issues as of late either. So the only thing I've heard of so far, and I haven't run into, I have never needed this function, was just the ability to upload or render certain codecs, I believe. And that was it.
I was hearing, like, when we were looking at the videos talking about DaVinci, it was saying that there was like, it's not too much, but there are like certain options that would be for coloring that aren't available in the free version. But it's not like anything that you would notice unless you really need it. So you'd have to be like a professional colorer, a colorist, to be able to see or notice it, probably. Is what they're saying, because they said like 95% of the functionality is there in the free version. So
yeah,
you're only missing, like, you're barely missing anything from having the full version, but you do have those little extra whatevers to entice you to maybe get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the general consensus on that is, if you're getting a free editor and you have the time to study it and really learn it, and not get too overwhelmed by how much it has and how scary it might be, then DaVinci is the free DaVinci version is the one to go with, because it just has the most functionality. It's on par with Adobe Premiere and the Final Cut Pro and the like that. So it's on par with those. So if you really have the time, and there's plenty of videos on it too, because it's more widespread now, and it keeps having more people come in, and more people, like Brian was saying, transfer over to it from these other editors, because people use this one. This is the industry standard for color grading. So what people have started doing is they've started seeing that instead of transferring my stuff over, DaVinci Resolve already lets me edit within its program. So maybe it's just easier if I start there and just do the whole thing in one software, instead of doing it in editing in Premiere or editing in Final Cut and then bringing it over to DaVinci Resolve and then bringing it back over to those other editors later. Just doing it all in one, so it's a little bit of a quicker workflow. And so a lot of people have been jumping ship. That's part of the reason. And it's probably, some other things, like they don't really like some of the aspects about those other editors, or I don't know, other things like that, preferences and all that. But I've heard one of the main reasons, or one of the big reasons why a lot of people are starting to jump ship over to it, is especially just because they want to be able to do everything in this one thing. And it has the capability of doing that. So they're like, oh, might as well. It's not like you get into it and the editing portion is laggy and buggy and crappy. It's on par with the rest of them. So you just get in there and you do all your stuff, and it's just a little bit different in the way it's laid out. It's a bit different in how complex it is. And it just comes down to preference like everything else. But for a free version, if you have time, definitely this one. If it's too scary to jump into this, then definitely start with something like iMovie, or I would say try Filmora, the free version, even though it has the watermarks, just so you can get used to editing before you jump into buying something a little more expensive. Windows Movie Maker, I don't know if I'd recommend or not. It's hard to say because I haven't really used it. If it's like iMovie at all, then sure, go ahead. But it does seem like it doesn't have the similar layout that iMovie and the rest of the editors have. It has a bit of a different one, a little bit of an older look, which might be a little bit more intimidating if you decide to go from Windows Movie Maker to something else, compared to if you go from like iMovie or another free editor to something else, you'll have an easier transition. So like I said, DaVinci Resolve is the industry standard for color grading. Avid Media Composer is the industry standard for video editing for now. Final Cut, people say Final Cut, which we'll get to. This is Final Cut. Let me get a better picture there. Final Cut. Final Cut has really good keywording capabilities for one, which helps it to find or search for clips or groups of clips later on as the project goes on. It's something that some people that organize a lot, they really like using Final Cut because it has a bit more options when it comes to like naming the files, or not naming, but like keywording them, giving them different metadata and stuff like that. And it makes it really easy to find the clips later, especially if you're working on multicam, large, long projects, something like a documentary, or that has like a bunch of different clips, or just a TV show that has a bunch of multicam. Being able to keyword those and separate them and find them later on, especially if you're working with multiple editors, people like that capability a lot, and they say, you know, the other editors can do it too, they just can't do as much of it, or it isn't as prominent as it is in Final Cut. So that's one thing with Final Cut. DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut Pro are one-time fees if you buy the full versions, as well as Sony Vegas Pro. While Avid and Premiere are subscriptions, so you have to continuously pay them, and it's not a one-time payment. Except for Avid has a way to buy a one-time purchase of it. I think it's called the perpetual license. I actually have it on here. So the Avid Media Composer it's really expensive though. It's $2,000 for the perpetual license, but you get all the updates that comes with it forever then, and you own that thing, and you get all the updates that come with it. Or it's $23.99 a month, or $49.99 a month for the ultimate, which includes a few extra features and things like that, like script sync, phrase find, symphony, and news cutter, which you'd have to like research those to really see what they do. But it helps to basically it helps to narrow down the clips and find clips within your thing so that it has kind of a like a transcode sort of, where you can look up a word and it finds it within your video, so you don't have to search through your entire thing to find it. So it is a good feature, but it will cost extra to get that. In Adobe Premiere Pro, it's $20.99 a month for the one program, or $52.99 a month for the Creative Cloud that has all of the Adobe apps, which is like After Effects, Photoshop, Illustrator, and it goes on. There's like 20, I think, 20 different apps that come with that. But it is quite expensive, especially if you're planning to use it long term. So the subscription-based ones are something to think about if you're trying to get into editing and you're actually trying to get into it long term, or if you're not really going to use it, you're kind of going to use it on and off here and there. Maybe you're going to do a YouTube video, or you're going to do a short film every few years, or every year or two, or every 6 months even. Then you don't really want to have to pay a subscription for like however many months that you're not going to use it if you forget to stop the renewal. But it could also be a good thing because you might just want to use the subscription for a few months while you're editing that one thing, and then leave it to cancel your subscription and wait until the next time you need it. So there is that. So it depends on what you're trying to do. But then DaVinci Resolve Studio, the full version, they have the free version, of course, but then the full version is $295. Final Cut Pro, it's only for Mac, it's $299. Pinnacle Studio, it's one of those ones that's in the middle. I didn't mention that earlier, but $109.95. Adobe Premiere Elements, $99. Then you have iMovie, DaVinci Resolve, which are free. So that's something to consider. Of course, when you are talking about video editing softwares, is the cost, and if it's a continuous cost, or if it's going to be a one-time payment. Brian, off the top of your head, do you know how much Vegas Pro costs? I know it's a one-time payment.
Vegas, it's around the same price as Premiere. It was around like the $400 to $600 range, I believe, or $400 to $500 range.
Okay.
In that area. But you can get Vegas Movie Studio for like $70, and you can actually go to Office Depot right now and buy it, or Best Buy and buy it.
Oh,
like
cool.
that was like the first software I ever had any experience. Well, I started off with Windows Movie Maker, and then I was like, well, I need something more that's more suitable for this. And then I looked online, and then I ran into Movie Studio, and then I learned the difference between Movie Studio and Movie Studio Pro. The biggest difference between Movie Studio is that it's like you said with DaVinci, is just like it's limited on a lot of stuff. Like you can only have up to like 5 video tracks and up to 5 audio tracks. Which, you know, at the time when I was using it, like I would have to learn how to, I'm running out of tracks and I have to learn how to do it. But if you get the Pro, you can have as many tracks as you want. And then another big one it had was it had green screen, it had the chroma keys, but it didn't have the rotoscoping functions or features on there. So it's like if you needed to track something with it, like you couldn't do that on there.
Right.
So that kind of led me into just going ahead and get the Pro version, because I was like, I just so tired of being limited. And like you were saying, when you learn to edit, when you think about it, you're like, oh, I'll just get the free, I'll get the, and then when you finally get there, you're like, dang, I need to upgrade.
Yeah. Dang, I wish I had that function. I didn't think I needed it, but now I see why it comes in handy.
Yeah. So
yeah. All right, going back to DaVinci Resolve, because I'm just kind of going in order of these notes that I had from these videos. So this is still from, actually, no, we're not on him anymore. Never mind. Anyway, DaVinci Resolve has 2 different editing formats. One's called Cut, one's called Edit. You can work with one or the other without using both, or you can utilize both. With Cut, it's kind of in a straight line. It's not layered like this. It's in a it's in more of a straight line to show you like what is being shown. I haven't used DaVinci Resolve, so I don't really know what exactly it does differently. I know that it has the rolling edit built into it, and it's just like a straight line of the video and audio clips. There's not a bunch of layers to it. It's just to quickly trim clips. When you have your edit set up the way you want it, you can go back into Cut, and you can really start to mess around with the in and out points of each clip so that you can really fine tune everything without having to mess with it extra in something like a timeline. So it's like using the rolling edit that we saw earlier in the semester, where you just, when you move one clip back or you move it forward, all the rest of the clips move with it so that there's not some random gap there, or you didn't accidentally cut off part of the next clip. It just shoved the clip forward, or it took the clip and brought it back. Then you have Edit, which is set up very similarly to what you'll see in Premiere Pro and Final Cut. Actually, Final Cut has somewhat different, but Premiere Pro and these other editors where they have these different layers where you will just put the video that you want to be shown on top. As you can see, if you look at this image right here, there's the water, and then there's the girl, and they have the girl on top. And so when we look at the actual the video up at the top right, it's showing her. It's not showing the clip underneath because she's on top. So that's how that works with the timeline. So people say like that can the cutting, when you go to the cut, if you look at the bottom, you can actually see it. If you like really look, it says media, cut, edit. I don't know what these say, but color. Some of them are really blurry because I've punched into this so far, but basically it's set up the same way that you would see in another editor. It's just in these different tabs. So the media tab would be like importing all of your stuff. Go to cut or go to edit to actually bring it into a timeline and edit it around and chop it up. And you go to like the color effects and that type of stuff to adjust that. And then you go into audio and things like that with the other tabs. Premiere is known to have really good customization features for its workstation, which allows you to change the layout and show the things you find the most important. While many of the other editors, kind of like DaVinci, it doesn't really have that. You can't, unless the newer version allows you to. I've heard that you can't really edit it around as much. It doesn't have as much functionality with that. Like with Premiere, for one, you can like click on the different little boxes. You can hide them from your workstation. Your workstation just being whatever you see on the computer in the entire frame. And then you can bring in whatever you want. So if you are editing color, you can change the workstation and preset it, save it so that you have all these color grading workstation elements to it. Or if you like to look at just one video at a time, you can do that and have just it be bigger. And then you can see like the clip you want to see instead of having two images next to each other. If it gets to something like that, if you don't want to have two videos next to each other, you can just do one. There's different things you can do depending on how you like it, how your workflow, but it does take a little bit of time to get used to. And for me, when I was doing it, I accidentally took something off the page, and it is somewhat difficult if you don't know what you're doing to find the stuff that you got rid of to put it back on the page. But there's like presets and things like that that you can also adjust. So that is what Premiere is known for very well. Another good thing that Premiere has that many of these other editors don't is because it has that suite of different apps, like connecting to After Effects and Photoshop and all these other different apps that it connects to. It has this thing called Dynamic Link, which integrates with very smooth transitioning between the different softwares. I know with After Effects and Premiere Pro, you can basically just switch it over to the other editor. And when you're editing in After Effects, it'll appear in Premiere Pro pretty much at the same time or something like that. So it's very intuitive in that way. If you need to use a bunch of different softwares, the way they have it set up is one of the reasons why it's so popular, is because you might want to use one of their other things, and it's just very easy to see what you're doing in both apps and both softwares at once, instead of taking it over to a new software and adjusting it and then bringing it back in, which just takes a little bit of extra time, and it's a little bit more of a back and forth than you have it with Premiere. With DaVinci, one of the things it has that it's very, very good that it has is you're able to switch between different hotkey layouts. One of the main things when you're editing, if you get into editing and you're really starting to work on editing and trying to better yourself with it, you want to learn how to use these keys to really quickly switch between like cutting and clicking and selecting and rolling edit and all these other keys that are going to change how the cursor reacts to this footage. And we showed all these different tools earlier in the semester. So what DaVinci does, whenever they're talking about when you're going into a new editor, whenever they're talking about you going into a new editor, one of the things that editors don't like is now they have to learn these new keys, and they have to learn like, oh, V doesn't do the same thing it did in Adobe, and C is no longer this and W is no longer that. So now these buttons that I've learned, that I've memorized over the years or over the months that I've been using this program, Now I have to relearn all those, and it's still going to get confusing because I might click the ones that I remembered from the other software. But what DaVinci does is, because they're trying to grow in this field and get a lot of these people to jump ship, is they actually allow you to, they have presets that match the hotkeys of either Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, and these other softwares that are more popular, so that they match those keys with the same functions, pretty much. Like the select button will be the select button and the cut button will be the cut button. So DaVinci has their own layout for that. The buttons do their own function, the keys do their own thing, but you can adjust that really quickly by just clicking a different preset and saying, I want it to be set up like how Premiere is. And then all the buttons will change to match what Premiere has in their program. So that's a very good thing for somebody that's trying to jump ship over to a new editor if you've learned one of these other ones. It'll be a little bit harder if you're going from like Adobe to Final Cut or vice versa, because I don't believe they allow you to adjust it that quickly. You'd have to actually like go in manually and readjust every single key, compared to just being able to click a button to have a preset flip it for you. So that's something to note. And one thing to note though is that editing, it's not so much about which editor you're using. It's more about how you're doing the edits, your timing, your rhythm, the story, all of these different elements that we're talking about for the story and the actual project that you're doing. It's not so much about, because all these things do very much the similar functions, it's not so much about the tool you're using, it's more about how you're using it. And so any of these will be, efficient enough for you to get whatever you're trying to get done if you're getting one of the higher end ones. Or if you're just doing smaller projects or you don't need all these functions, then the lower end ones will be just fine. It just depends on what you need for the tool. But once you have that tool, it's just about preference and about like which one you like better. iMovie and Final Cut Pro are obviously only on Mac, so that is a drawback. Of course, if you have Windows computers only, then those two are unavailable to you, so you might as well just skip them. Adobe Premiere Pro, Avid Media Composer, and DaVinci Resolve are all both on Windows and Mac. So if you have Windows or if you have Mac, you can have those options and more. DaVinci Resolve is a newer editor. It's newer in that space anyway, so it doesn't have as many plugins as Avid, Adobe, and Final Cut, but that is starting to change because, as Brian said, more people are jumping ship to it now and it's getting more popular. So that might start to change and it might get a bunch more out. But currently, these other ones have just more plugins, and plugins are just more options and presets and things like that that'll really help speed up your edit if you're going to use different elements and you want to match somebody's, like a color grade. There's color grade presets, there's visual effect presets like lightsaber effects, lightning effects, fire effects, different things like that that are already pre-made, and you just buy the plugin and you get it to look exactly like that other person had it, and then you can adjust it the way you want in your individual thing instead of having to create it from the ground up. So plugins are just a quick way to really get all of that functionality that you wouldn't really be able to get on your own building it from scratch. Unless you know how to do it, then you can go ahead. But it just really speeds up things and has people that know what they're doing, and you can buy what they did so that you don't have to figure out how to do it, pretty much. These pros and cons, these come from Vince Oprah or something. It's from Video F. So these are his opinions, and I just wrote them down to let you all know. It says Premiere Pro versus Final Cut versus Camtasia Studio versus iMovie. That's the video. It says Premiere Pro, there's tons of tutorial videos because it's been around for so long and it's so popular. You'll find as many tutorials as you need on every single function for that program. So if you just type in Premiere Pro tutorial in Google, there'll be millions of things that pop up. There's a lot of creative control, lots of pre-made templates and plugins like I was just talking about, and they have frequent updates where they're continuously updating this software. The cons are it's sub-based only, so subscription-based only, which is a con because then you never actually own the thing, which really sucks. The user interface can be overwhelming if you're first jumping into it, if you're new to editing. Some of the effects require additional software like After Effects, so it's not really all in one like you might find in DaVinci or Final Cut, where you can do some of these things in the program itself. Premiere Pro has some visual effects and things like that, but when you're trying to get into graphics and titling, you basically want to jump over to After Effects to really get it there, to really get the good ones and to make it look as good as you can, compared to some of these other ones that might have more of that stuff built into the program itself. And another thing is that Premiere Pro uses the CPU mostly. So that's the processor on your computer, and the RAM, of course. But so that means that it takes up a lot more computing power to get the thing to work properly. Also, according to a lot of people, not just him, but like a bunch of the people that were talking about the pros and cons of these things, Premiere Pro apparently crashes a lot. And so that can be an issue, especially if you haven't saved in a bit, even if it's
We
only
heard
a
that
minute or
a
two.
lot.
Everybody was saying that. So
Yes, it does. Everybody, like I'm not talking trash. I hate to be the guy that's, oh, you use Premiere and da 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 da, but like I remember film school learning. Final Cut does the same thing, so don't feel bad. Like Final Cut is the exact same. I used to hate Final Cut Pro, and that's when I was like turning while everybody in class was learning Final Cut, I was like secretly learning Premiere on the side because I was like, this is retarded. And then once everybody started shifting to Premiere, it was like, don't get me wrong, it's a dope software, but me personally, I just don't like to rely on it. Like just because like every time I remember I was doing this 148 film festival, and normally I'm so used to doing everything myself, like writing all that and then going back and editing, but the producer of this one was like, oh man, I got an editor. I was like, all right, that's awesome, let's work for me. And you know, he was editing on this computer, and we edited the project, and it went through, it rendered in like 2 minutes, and I was like, that doesn't sound right. I was like, I know it's only like a 7-minute video, but 3 minutes is kind of like wishy-washy. And he's like, oh no, like it's, you know, it's the new Premiere, the new computer and all this stuff. I was like, all right, cool. So he pulls it out, puts it on his flash drive. He doesn't even bother to check it to make sure it's good. He hands me the drive.
Oh, man.
Get all the way to, because you know, for the 48 you have to be there in person to turn it in. So
Yeah.
I get there and I get this phone call, and they're like, yeah, we can't accept this because there's no audio on it. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah. Like, so that's why it rendered so fast, because it wasn't rendering the audio for some reason. Like, it was just ridiculous. And after that I was like, I can't do it. Like, if I'm going to rely on Premiere, like I would have to have the time of day, because like, I've never had any issues with any other stuff. Well, Final Cut. But as far as like when you get to that home stretch of rendering, it's always like that big question mark. Is like, because you know, sometimes you'll get that you hit the render button and you're like, dude, it's gonna be like 3 hours by the time it's finished. So it's like at the end of the night and you're like, well, I go to sleep and I wake up and it should be done rendering, and you go to sleep and you wake up and it crashed.
It's an error message. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like a gamble with that one. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of the people were saying like they heard that the newest update kind of tried to fix some of that stuff, but they've been saying that for so long that they don't believe it. So not to trash on it. I have Premiere Pro. I have an older version though. I don't have the one online, but
I believe it must have something going for it, right? Because people still use it even with all of those complaints. Like almost every single person said it's crashed on them at least once.
oh yeah,
And
because it still has the interconnectivity of all these other apps that go with it. That just makes it easy to go from that one to that one to that one.
But that's not the only reason, right? Like there must be
It
something.
also has a
on it.
lot it can do. I mean, it can do a lot. It's just, you know, there's just,
Unreliable.
yeah, the reliability on it isn't the best. So save a lot if you're using it, is what they say. Because if you forget to
Basically, just
save,
like when you're playing a video game and you keep dying, just keep saving before you go.
in case
hit
your
the button.
editor dies, in case the editing
Yeah.
system dies. Yeah. All right. For Final Cut Pro, he said the pros are it's optimized well and it's super fast because it's made for Apple products. It's good. It's well optimized for the functionality of those things. He said it doesn't crash as much as Premiere Pro. It still does occasionally, but not as much as he's had experience with Premiere Pro. The autosave function saves a lot and it saves in the background. So it doesn't like pause your edit while you're going to autosave as some of these other editors might. It does it in the background and it does it frequently. So even though it does crash, it isn't as big of a deal as with Premiere if you forget to save with Premiere. Premiere also has an autosave function, but it doesn't do it as much. And so it can be an issue if it glitches out and you are 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or an hour into editing and you forgot to save from that point, then you just lost all that work. So he said that's a good thing for Final Cut is it does that. It has something called a magnetic timeline, which I've never used it, so I can't really say, but it looks like this. It's kind of like with the other editors, if you took the video from the top portion and you put it down in the bottom, what it would do is it would, if you weren't in rolling edit or something like that, it's going to take the clip underneath it and just chop it right where you bring that footage. With the magnetic timeline, from what I've seen anyway, it looks like when you bring it down, it just kind of moves the rest of the clips over and makes everything space out of the way. So it doesn't like affect the rest of the edit. It just brings that video portion into wherever you want. And so some people really like it. Some people say it's great and it's helped speed up their editing. Some people hate it and they say that they don't like the way it works and they don't like what it's doing and it's confusing because they're used to the other way of things working. So if you're just starting out editing, it won't really be a problem because you will learn from the start one of these types of ways of doing it. But if you have edited on another program, then the magnetic timeline will be a bit different than what you might be used to from something else. And he says that the render times are faster on Final Cut Pro, especially comparing it to Premiere Pro. He says Premiere Pro has very slow render times at times, or it has that problem like Brian's saying, where you're afraid it might crash. Whereas something like Final Cut Pro, even if it's the same video length and the same quality and the same codec and everything like that, it still will render it out in like half the time or 3/4 of the time as it would in Premiere Pro. So if you're rendering out a big project all the time, Final Cut Pro might be a good thing. Just if it actually works the way this guy's saying it does, then it'll be a bit quicker on the rendering, because rendering can take a very long time, hours. It can take days depending on what you're doing and how complex the composition is in the composite. Moving on from, and then we have the cons. The cons are for Final Cut Pro, it's not good for color grading. So again, with the DaVinci Resolve having that free version, it's not too big of a deal because you can bring the Final Cut Pro project over to DaVinci to do the color grading for free, and then bring it back into Premiere Pro when you're done, or Final Cut Pro when you're done. But since we are viewing these on as a, like, you do everything inside of the editor, he said, color grading inside of Final Cut Pro isn't the best. He said it doesn't have as many plugins. It still has quite a lot, but it doesn't have as many as Premiere Pro or some of the other ones. It doesn't have that ecosystem that Adobe has with all those connected apps. So again, you wouldn't be able to just, if you do have to put in something like you have to go to another software to do something very specific, like the titles in Final Cut aren't working for you. So you need to get something that's a little more better suited to do titles. Then you have to take it out of that program and put it into the one with the titles, put the title in, and then bring it back into your editor. Whereas something like Premiere Pro, because it has that ecosystem, if you have all of the creative suite, then you can just bring it into After Effects or something like that and add those graphics in that you need, and then bring it back into Premiere Pro very, very quickly, easily. So that is a con for Final Cut Pro. It doesn't have that ecosystem. It only runs on Mac OS, which is also, that's not a good thing. And then it costs $300, which is out of some people's budgets when they're talking about just starting with editing. And he has something called Camtasia Studio Pro. I've actually never heard of this one until I saw his video, but he said it's very user-friendly. It has decent effects. It's a great basic editor, but the cons are you have to pay for updates. So after you pay for the full thing, you have to pay for any updates that come out. And he said that really sucks because some of these other ones, you buy it and you just keep getting the updates, or you're subscribing to it. So you just continuously get the updates for free. He said that Camtasia is slow and it crashes, and it has very few plugins just because it's not really used as much. And it has that same $300 cost. So he said, like, you might just want to skip this one. It is a little bit more user-friendly than the others, but it has the same cost. So at that point, you might as well just get a cheap one, learn the ropes, and then get the more expensive one for something that's going to work a bit better. Imovie, when he's talking about Imovie, the pros are it's free, of course. Free is always good. It's free for Mac only, though. It only works on Mac. It's super easy to use. It has a very simple interface. I think, so yeah, that's what it looks like. iMovie. Very simple, not too much going on as in the other ones. It just has like 3 different little areas. It shows you the clips. You can scrub through it. You can put it down in your timeline, and you have the viewing window over here. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but it is a lot more of a simple design than you would see in something like Premiere Pro or Final Cut, which has a lot more going on inside of it. The cons are it has limited capabilities, and of course, it's only for Mac. He also said that a pro is that it has a great introduction to editing, especially because it's free and it comes with Mac. Any kind of Mac you buy, you should have it already on your computer. And if you don't, you can just download it for free. And it's really fast and optimized because, again, it's Apple product. It's already made for Apple, so it works really well with the pre-designed hardware. Whereas stuff like Windows Movie Maker, it can't be as optimized because every computer you get is going to have different parts in it. Macs, they come with their own parts, and they don't really let you change them out unless you're going to, kind of rip them open and do that yourself. They already have the parts, and they don't really let you change them. So the softwares that are made for Mac are a little bit more integrated and optimized for Mac itself because of that. So it can really be optimized for that specific graphics card and that specific processor so that it can just use it to its full potential, compared to like something that's only on Windows. That's a little bit harder to do because there's so many different pieces to the computer that people could get. And so it can't be optimized for one graphics card over another because there could be 10 different people that have 10 different graphics cards. So you don't want to optimize it for any single one. All right. So going on from that, one of the things that we were hearing is that Premiere has many different export options. It actually has more than most. Now, sometimes you might have something new come out, like when DaVinci came out with theirs, they had the integrated for and optimized to use BRAW, which was their raw codec that they use in their cameras. And of course, Premiere didn't have that yet because it wasn't popular and it wasn't out until later. And then they optimized their program to use it. But for the most part, Premiere has more options than most for exporting. It has, because it's available for both Windows and Mac, and because it's been out for a very long time, they typically have the most export options. You might not even need all of them, but if you do, it's good to know which one might have the better pool of different ones. BlackMagic Davinci Resolve, as Brian actually said earlier, the full version of that will come for free for you if you buy a Blackmagic cinema camera like the Pocket 4K, I think, and the 6K, and some of their other cameras. You get the DaVinci Resolve full version for free. So that is something that you might want to think about, especially if you're trying to buy cameras and you don't know which one to get, and you're trying to buy a camera and an editor and you don't really know what you want. That could be a thing to look into to see if you want to buy their camera to get their full software for free. Even though they also have that free version that has about 95% of the functions, it's still a bonus to get all the functionality to it for free when you buy one of their cameras. Final Cut Pro, said to be very fast. In other videos as well, a lot of them were saying the same thing. Final Cut Pro is known to be very fast. Rendering times and things like that are very quick. And it's a little bit more reliable than Premiere for not shutting down and things in the middle or having errors as much. Of course, because BRAW is DaVinci's from their camera, Blackmagic. DaVinci is from Blackmagic. So Blackmagic is the company that makes those cameras. And because their camera codec is BRAW, one of their main ones, DaVinci works the best with it because it is utilized to use that one the best. They had that one in mind when they were making the editing system. So it still works in other editors, but with DaVinci, that type of file will work best with it. Final Cut works best with ProRes because that's Apple. So of course, Apple focused on theirs more. Avid Media Composer works best with the DNX codec because that's Avid's codec. So these codecs will work with other ones, but those are the ones that they work with best, the ones that they were optimized for the most, just because it's coming from the same company. So that could potentially make you decide one over the other. Even though they all it doesn't really it's not a huge difference, but it is something that you might want to think of, especially if you're working on long projects. The better it works with your system, the faster it'll be. And that speed is everything when you're talking about editing long projects. Final Cut is great at viewing and scrubbing through the footage very quickly. Final Cut has the, I think I have a picture of it. I think it's this one. So you see that the images up at the top, you can see how long they are, and there's a little line. I know it's a little bit small, but this picture's small. So the one at the top left, it's the video. All you have to do is move your mouse over it. It'll automatically start playing it. And you can just quickly move your mouse cursor over it to scrub through the footage and see where you want to make in and out points, where you might want to make a cut, all those types of things. Where other editors, you have to actually click on the clip and bring it into a separate window. Like in Adobe Premiere, you would bring it into one of these windows. There could be one or two, and then you would view it on that. So it's just a bit quicker, and that's where some of that speed comes from for faster editing, is when you're scrubbing through footage. Final Cut Pro has it automatically play. Some people say they don't really like that because it gets kind of annoying and confusing when you're just trying to look at a clip or bring it down into the timeline. You don't want it to automatically play. So again, that comes down to preference and what you find most useful? Do you find it more useful to view it right just by scrolling through it and have a little bit of an easier time with that? Or do you find it more useful to have it all in order and just bring it down in your timeline or double click on it and it's not really that big of a deal to you? That comes down to your preference. The one thing they say about Final Cut though is it isn't as good or as intuitive as some of its competitors with basic audio editing. So it's not really that good with audio editing, and you might need to get a different software for it. If you're doing little short videos and you're doing something that's not really like up to a professional level, it doesn't matter as much. But to get really good audio, you would have to bring it into a separate thing altogether. And you usually have to do that anyway with, like Adobe and these other Avid even, they have Media Composer is their video editor and Pro Tools is their audio. So, I mean, these other softwares, they don't really like have amazing advanced audio editing either, but they just have a bit better than what Final Cut Pro has. So if you don't need to like make a professional mix, then it doesn't really matter to bring it into another editor if you're not using something like Final Cut Pro. But if you're using Final Cut Pro, you might need to get a different editor just because the audio functions in that are to a lesser degree. Davinci uses a graphics card and the processor on your computer. So it doesn't put as much strain as some of these other editors on your processor because it's utilizing that graphics card to take some of that processing power or editing to let it edit quicker. It's using both the graphics card more than other editors as well as the processor. So it's not using the processor as much as these other editors are, but it still requires a great deal of computing power to make it work well. All of these do really, but it's just something to note. The edit place, which is K in the videos, this one thing they said about Davinci is it's really great. They decided to transfer over from Premiere to it because Premiere was crashing on them, and they said, "No, I'm not going to use this anymore. I want to use something else." And so they did Davinci, and they said it's great until you start trying to add titles. And they said that titles in Davinci is really bad. It starts slowing down the program, and it starts crapping out and glitching and freaking the software out. So it doesn't really work that well with titles. He says sometimes he'll even export it with a title and he's done all the adjustments. And when he exports it, when the export gets done, the title in the video is different looking or it's not there at all. So that's just something that Davinci isn't great at right now. They'll probably, hopefully they'll advance that later and they'll work out those kinks. But as of now, Davinci is not that good with titles. And so if that's something that you're interested in doing a lot of, you might want to either use Davinci and then use something else to do the titles, or just use something else entirely for your whole project. One thing to consider, and Brian even brought this up when he was talking about Vegas Movie Studio, which is the cheaper version of the Sony Vegas Pro software, which is the number of tracks that you can use. Video tracks, you don't usually need as many. You sometimes, it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a lot of like visual effects, if you're doing titles with graphics on top with masks and different things, you probably need a bunch of layers of video tracks. But typically speaking, you're not going to need as many as you would need for audio tracks. Audio tracks, you want to layer stuff. You want to have a different layer for different sound effects. You want to have a different layer for music, and you want to have a different layer for your dialogue. So that way nothing is cutting anything off. It's easy to see, it's easy to find, it's easy to adjust. It's easy to mute out all of the sound effects just to listen to the music and all that kind of stuff. So you want to have enough tracks to be able to put all these things in, to layer all that audio out, to make these sound effects sound really good, and to have the music and the dialogue playing all at once without it messing up, or without you accidentally taking something off or muting something you didn't mean to, or whatever else. So some of the free ones have less video tracks that you can use. Some of them have less audio tracks that you can use. I think Brian said Sony Vegas the Sony Movie Studio has 5 video tracks and 5 audio tracks. So the cheaper version only has 5 and 5, and 5 audio tracks. You might start running into some problems when you are trying to do a scene or a moment that has a lot of different elements to it. Like an explosion, for instance. You want to have that explosion have a few different layers of different sounds happening so that it seamlessly sounds like one sound, but really it's layered different chunks and pieces of different noises happening all in different times to make it sound like the explosion. And then if you have the dialogue and the music, well, you know, you can only have 3 tracks for the video effect, and then 1 track for audio, for dialogue, and then 1 track for music. And if you have 2 characters speaking, or if you have 3 characters speaking, maybe 2 of them are speaking over each other. Now you need another audio track, and you can't have that. So whenever you're looking into any kind of editor, always just look up how many tracks it's able to have. For all of the ones that are like, for all of the higher tier ones, the ones that are like $300 or the subscription ones, pretty much all of them said that they can do 99 tracks of audio, 99 tracks of video. So that's pretty much good enough. Or they can do unlimited, some of them. I think Adobe can do unlimited, and I think Filmora can do unlimited. If I think I have that right. And I think Avid can do unlimited too, but 99 should be sufficient enough. I mean, you might need it more than that, but if 99 most of the time for almost everything is going to be good enough. But yeah, if you're looking into the free ones or the cheaper ones, just look and see how many tracks that they allow you to have. Because if it's a limited amount, that is a problem. Imovie lets you have 2 video tracks only, but you can have as many audio tracks as you want. So you can't do too much complex stuff in that with the video, but at least it has enough audio tracks to let you layer that out. Again, overall, they all do basically the same functions for editing, cutting, clipping, trimming, transitions, simple effects like that. But the higher tier ones just do much of the same stuff with slight differences in their layout, their naming conventions, and then they have the specialized specific functions and features. And with the cheaper ones or the free ones, your main limiter is just that it has less functions, less capability, less things that it can do. It has way less plugin support, so there's not as many presets and things like that made that you can get, because those are for more of the higher tier ones. The export settings and the formats, as well as the codecs and the support that you can export it to, like Brian was talking about, the cheaper one for Sony, they're for Vegas Movie Studio. That one doesn't allow you to export as many things. Or Davinci, the free version, it has a few different export settings that are unavailable. So the cheaper ones and the free ones, they have way less export capability than the other ones. And some of the free ones might have very limited ones to where you can't do high resolution exports. It's like 4K. Like you might not be able to edit in 4K or export in 4K, and all you can do is 1080p or 720p. So that's something to consider and look at before you're looking into getting it or buying it, and editing your whole thing on it, just to realize that exporting it isn't going to turn out the way you want it to. You need to check and see that it's going to export to the settings you want based on where you're trying to put it up. Now for the free ones and stuff, using it, if you're just doing stuff for YouTube or if you're just doing stuff for online, you'll be pretty good to go. You won't really need, you won't really have to worry about it. But if you're trying to make like a short film or a film and you're trying to give it away to a festival run, or especially if you're trying to do distribution of any kind, then you're going to need those extra export settings to export at higher resolutions and export in different codecs to where it works for multiple platforms. And then, of course, with the cheaper and free ones, the last thing you need to worry about is how well they handle the stuff, how much they are reliable, and how quickly they work. Because some of them will be slower if you start getting complex with things and starting to try to add a lot of visual effects. Some of them will really start slowing down and kind of not crashing per se, but they'll start slowing down to the point where they're kind of unusable at some point, depending on how complex you're trying to get. So that's also something to consider. And I would just look up reviews of whichever one you're considering getting, especially if you're considering buying a cheaper one. Just make sure it works well for what you're trying to do with it. And make sure that it's going to handle that stuff well and it's not going to bug out and maybe crash on you or just be so slow that you can't use it at some point if you're trying to do too much with it. So with the more expensive ones, the only thing is there's all that stuff, but it just comes with more of a learning curve, a big learning curve to really understand all these different functions. There's a lot of tutorial videos out there for all of these, but you are just gonna have to take the time, a lot more time looking at it and seeing what they do, especially if you wanna use these editing softwares to their full potential. You have to look into all their functions, and then you're not gonna understand half or 3/4 of these functions and what they do until you kind of look into them or look up or just test them out on your own videos or go on to YouTube or something like that and look up tutorials and see what are these things and what are they gonna do and why are they here? Do I need them? Are they beneficial? And with the cheaper ones or the free ones, you have less of that stuff. So you don't really have to worry about as big of a learning curve because there's not as much there, which is both a negative and a positive. It's positive for learning. It's positive for basic stuff to get the basics of editing down, but it's negative in that you won't have that functionality when you start to think that you need it or when you wish you had it. And you're halfway through your edit or you're all the way done and you're like, oh, I really wish I could add this one thing, but I don't have it in that editing software. So that's the differences. That's all the stuff to look out for. There's a bunch of different editing softwares than the one I've said. The main ones are Avid, Adobe, Final Cut, and Davinci. But there's also Sony Vegas for one of the higher tier ones. And then there's those mid-tier ones. There's plenty of them that I didn't even mention because I don't know all of them. And then there's even more free options that I don't know. But if you just look it up, you can find plenty of them. Just do your research and try to figure out what works best for you and what you're trying to use this for. And of course, with free ones, just keep in mind that you can always get them, test it out, see if you like it, and keep it and buy the higher version if they have one, or you can just upgrade to a different editing software because once you learn the basics of this timeline, importing footage, exporting, settings, and all that stuff, you kind of have the basics down and you can more seamlessly go into the next editor with more confidence. Anyone have any questions or anything to add with that? Editing softwares. Oh, that's what Sony Vegas looks like, by the way. It's the same stuff. You got the viewer, you got the timeline, you got the images up at top left with all the imported media.
Yeah, it's also just like Premiere, it's very customizable. So like for me, I'm used to having my viewer down at the bottom as opposed to the top. I like to have my timeline at the top because I think like normally my eyes progress towards the top of the screen because, you know, we're used to reading from left to right, top to bottom. And I think the more important stuff is on the timeline as opposed to what's going on in the viewfinder. So I usually customize my layout for the timeline being on top. So that is a good feature to have, to be able to customize your editor that way.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So that's why they say, like, you know, Premiere and Vegas and some of those other ones are a little bit more customizable and really give you those options to be able to really adjust to how you like it. Especially once you start editing, you start getting used to what you think is more important or what you would like to have and where you'd like to have it. Especially if you have two monitors set up, then you can choose what kind of settings you want over to the right to your second monitor and what you want on your primary. And it really starts getting a way more customizable that way. But if you have one of those editors that doesn't have as much customization, then it's just going to put whatever it wants over on the other monitor or on your monitor that you're using, just if you're using one.
Yeah, like I had mentioned earlier about you know, so like Avid and DaVinci being like this top tier. And a couple meetings ago, I'd also mentioned that, you know, DaVinci, even though it was free, you know, it wasn't, you know, the most ideal to start off with because it was so complex and so stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
when I first got it, like I mentioned, like they changed the layout to look more like an editor, but the original version looked like a color grading software, which was like you get it, you open it, you're like, oh my god, what is this? It was difficult to work with because, like I said, like the only people that had access to like DaVinci and Avid were like people that worked at studios. So like you worked at a studio, or you had like a crap ton of money to be able to get the software. So because of that, like they didn't really bother to, you know, customize it for, you know, people. You know, there was no tutorials for it. It was just like you took a class on it somewhere, got certified on it, and then you worked at the studio and you learned how to use it. And that was it. Like nowadays, everybody's learning online how to do it themselves. Before, it was like you couldn't do that. You had to like go to school for it and learn how to do it and whatnot.
Right.
But the point I'm trying to get is like when you first got like DaVinci, when I first got it, it's the program itself was designed for you to be editing in a suite, an editor suite, which means you had to have at least 2 to 3 monitors at least. So when you first opened it, like the software dominated your screen. So in order for me to take tutorials, I would have to use my phone and look it up because I wouldn't be able to, you know, like when you open Premiere, you still have your toolbar on the bottom where you can pull up something on, you know, from the internet. You couldn't do that because DaVinci was so demanding. I don't know what the when you open DaVinci up, it would take over the whole screen. Like you wouldn't be able to get to the timeline or get to your toolbar without closing out the software. That was so annoying because like in order for me to learn how to use it, I'd need to go and learn a tutorial, and then in order to get to tutorial, I would have to go on my phone because I wouldn't be able to access it from my computer.
Right.
So it was very, very demanding. Like it was a software that was meant for a certain type of workflow. And that's what I was getting at when I said that, because like people would get it and they would open it up and realize that, this computer isn't even designed to even work with this software. Like this is a serious software, but they've changed it now. Like the layout you've seen there, that's new, and it's more compatible with the industry, you know, the amateur filmmakers and independent filmmakers. But Avid was like that. I'm not sure if Avid has changed, but yeah, Avid was like that too. I remember working on Avid a little bit, and it was like that too. Like you would open it up and it would just take over everything. Like you wouldn't be able to go back and forth. Like if you needed to get something off the internet, that would like, it was no internet for you. Like, you know, yeah, just dominated the screen. So
it was
that's
made
something
for that specific studio setting, I guess.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like there's different types of like me, I'm used to editing on my, and that's where it's going now. Like I'm used to editing on my laptop, but back in the day it was like if you wanted to be a serious editor, you had to have like a computer that was able to handle all the, you know, the power of the editing software. And then you had to have at least 2 or 3 monitors to be able to make the system work appropriately or something like that. But they're changing it now where it's like, because more and more people are just just editing on your laptops and stuff like that. So, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like changed a bunch recently with the new chips and the smaller designs of everything and slimmer
yeah,
compared to needing like those giant server computers back in the day.
yeah. And that was another thing. One of the main reasons why, like, because like I said, I went to school for it, so like we learned Final Cut, we learned Premiere, we learned like all the softwares. So like the thing is, why would I stay with Vegas after because Vegas is not the most popular one. It is definitely one of the more underdog. It's an underdog software because like it's very popular with gamers. Gamers like to use it for some reason, but like I know the ins and outs of Vegas. I know it's got a lot of stuff that a lot of other softwares don't have, but it's just not industry standard. You go to, all of a sudden you go to film school and they're telling you this is what the pros use and stuff, and you're like, so why would you stick with Vegas? And for me to stick with Vegas is just simply because it's just so simplified and so easy to use. Like when you open, I'm not sure Premiere still does this, but I know Final Cut does it. I know DaVinci does it, but like when you click on the icon, it opens up, then you have to start a project. You have to name your project, or you have to select a project or something like that before you can edit. Vegas doesn't do that. It's like you click on the icon, it opens up, and it's like you worry about that later. Like when you want to save it, then you can save it. Like you can worry about all that stuff later. If you want to import stuff, it's simply just click and drag. You just go on your desktop or wherever. You just pull the files, click and drag them onto your you can click and drag them right onto your timeline. I think Final Cut has gotten hip to it, and I think Premiere finally got. But it's kind of just like the wars between Apple phones and Androids, where like Apple, hey, we got this feature, Androids like, oh, it was kind of like that with Vegas. It was like, dude, like a lot of these features people are bragging about now. It's like, dude, Vegas been had it.
And also,
But
well, the whole thing
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
Apple, the whole thing with the Apple versus Android debate, and I think it's similar to what you're saying with the Vegas versus everything else, is that yes, Apple was later to get things, but it was always simple and base. And some people loved how many choices they had on Android and how they could customize it, and some people hated having. They're like too overwhelmed by it. Like, no, I just want a phone that's simple and chooses the options for me and like has the basic stuff that I need and a little, and so that sounds similar to what you're saying. It's like, yeah, it might not have like some of the bells and whistles that the other thing has, but it's simpler, it's more intuitive.
There's that, but then there's also, it's just the fact that it's so, like, for me, like I carry, like when I go on shoots, I bring my laptop with me. So like if I'm not sure about how something's gonna look color wise, I'll pop my SD card in the computer, pull up Vegas, and I'll edit it, like look at it right then and there. It's just like for Final Cut and Premiere and DaVinci, there's like 2 or 3 extra steps that you got to take in order to do that. As opposed to with Vegas, I can just open it up and just click and drag, and then I'm ready to go. But if I wanted to do that with Premiere or any other softwares, it's like I got to take these extra steps to open it.
Right.
I think it's like
speed.
I think it's like I've been saying for the past few weeks as well. The more I learn and hear people talk about these softwares, it definitely will come down to your preference and what works for you and what projects you're doing. Because you swear by Vegas, some people swear by Premiere. Like it really does come down to preference at the end of the day and what works for you and what's best for your project and what you feel like you feel is more intuitive to you. And that's interesting to me. That was because I knew that they were all somewhat similar. But I always thought, oh, it must be like this one's more specifically for this and this one's more specifically for that. And there is a lot more wiggle room between them and a lot more similarities than not. And it really does at the end of the day come down to preference, what you're used to, what you like more, your interface, what kind of OS operating system you're using. It's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, and like that's why a lot of it comes down to like how fast because again, editing comes down to speed because you're doing it for so long, you're doing continuous repetitive things. So it all comes down to how intuitive it is for you to get that speed you want. Like Brian's saying, he doesn't want that extra step of doing that stuff beforehand because he just wants to get in there, put his footage in and start messing with it. And so that extra step or two at the beginning of the project kind of just bogs it down a little bit. And yeah, I can totally understand that. So it's just depending on what you want and how fast it feels like it's working for you, or just, your mindset towards it for real. If you guys want, there's PCMag.com. Their picks for the best video editing software. I mean, they give you some pros and cons on each, and they give you like some of the main ones. And even the free ones and stuff like that, they give some pros of it being like beautifully simple interface, color matching for consistent movie looks, classy themes, great chroma keying. Oh, so iMovie does have chroma keying, like green screen. It's probably, it's definitely not going to be as intuitive as Final Cut or something like that, which will have better version, or After Effects, which will have a much better version, but it does have it for the basic uses. Lots of audio tools, excellent movie templates. And so you guys can go through these things and see what you want. They also give you the price or if they have a free trial. And I think there's a few
that's what
more.
I was going to
Resolve.
I was going to recommend that if people that want to try out and see which system works best for them or which one they want to try, if you can take advantage of a free trial to test it out and see which one works better for you, I would really recommend that, because I feel like that's a great way of getting to know each one a little bit and seeing which one you like more and seeing which one works better for what you need. Because people can give you recommendations up and down all day and explain what works for them. But at the end of the day, only you are going to know what system works better for your workload, for your for the way you like to do things, for your specific project.
Hey, look at this. Vegas Pro says it's $250 according to this.
Well, damn, which version?
I don't know. It just says Vegas Pro.
Yeah, they're at Vegas. The current version is Vegas 19, so that might be it, but I don't know. But
Right.
if it is,
They say the pros for that have excellent color grading, clear color grading tools, free stock clips. Oh, that's something else to mention. Different editing softwares and different things will have more or less free elements to them, like free stock footage, free sound effects. So if you're making basic editing, basic videos and things like that, typically you can find some of the music that you need or some of the audio effects or some like free visual effects you'll find already in the editing software itself. So that's another thing to look out for whenever you're looking to what you want to do. If you're just making something a little bit more basic, if you're making something like a feature film, then of course you want to get a professional, or if you know what you're doing, to do the audio editing yourself and you're not really going to rely as much on stock footage or stock audio as much, but you still might. But yeah, so some of these come with like free stock footage, free audio, and free music clips for you to use in your videos. Something else to consider.
Vegas also has its own suite similar to Premiere. They have their own audio software, audio engineering software, and they have their own they have a DVD burning software. That's something you don't really see with other programs, where it's like
You're not condone that.
it'll
No,
let
DVD
you.
burning is for like your projects, right?
Okay.
Not
I
bootlegging.
just didn't want to get involved in any pirate.
Yeah, no, it's DVD burning as in like making a DVD of your project.
Make it a DVD.
Okay.
So
Okay, we're not torrenting anything. Gotcha.
yeah, but
Not that I've ever done that, ever. What? What's torrent? I don't know. Anyway, moving on.
yeah, but that's a rare one. Like I mean, we've progressed, we've moved on. Everything is streaming now. Like, but that before, when
Yeah. It is a lot more accessible. Yeah.
when I was in film school, that was the template. Burn it on a DVD so they can play it on the TV. So that was a big thing to have. I was, because I was the only one, because everybody used what is the Apple's what is their little, they have their own little
Imovie?
burner. Yeah, they burn it, but like I was like the only one that had like because it allows you to make menus, customize your menus and stuff, like a real.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Oh yeah,
Great.
I've seen that. It's cool.
Yeah.
looking.
Yeah, I was the only one with customized menus. And everybody go, how do you do that? Like,
I guess now it's also a lot easier to upload your footage online. I feel like back then, very few people knew how to do it, and it was also a lot heavier. I mean, I don't know early 2000s internet very well, but
Oh,
I
yeah,
can imagine there wasn't really many platforms where you could upload your footage.
streaming. Yeah, streaming. It was just YouTube, and now it's just YouTube and Vimeo. I don't know what the big deal is. Like Vimeo is supposed to be like for us. When I say us, I mean filmmakers, for us, by us. But like for some reason, YouTube is just more. I don't know. It's just I feel more
I
comfortable.
think it's just because there more people are on there. It's just like they're trying to make all of these new apps and all of this new stuff happen. And it's hard because these places have been established for decades at this point. Like YouTube came out in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been around for over 15, like 17 years now. And so I don't doubt that some of these other platforms can grow, obviously, and we shouldn't give up or not try to upload them on there because, it's probably not going to, work. We should still try, but we shouldn't expect that we're going to get the same right away as a YouTube, for example. And I still think it's smart to upload it in multiple platforms if you can.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move on. So yeah, and if anybody wants to like check this whole list out, and just pcmag.com, the best video editing software. You just Google that, and it'll come up with this website. Or it's also in the syllabus if you want it. It's on M in the syllabus underneath editing softwares. Now we're gonna move on to monitors. We're gonna talk about both monitors being used for an external, like you use a field monitor or a camera monitor. They're all kind of named the same thing, but it's basically a separate monitor from your camera. So your camera might come with its own little LCD screen or something like that. But you might want to buy one of these monitors for a bigger screen and for more functions that these are able to do that your camera can't. So there's the difference. Like if you have a camera on the bottom, you have that little screen, but if you get a monitor, you can see a lot more of it. You'll have a larger screen, maybe a higher resolution, probably a better color range than you would get through your camera. Since your camera has so much going on, they don't focus as much on the screen as a device that's basically just for looking at that screen. So for external, this stuff comes from DSLR Video Shooter C. Well, some of this stuff, some of it's me, but I'm just going to mix it in with what he said. For external monitors, you want to look for a few things that you might or might not have in your camera monitor already. So when you're looking for a new external monitor or a field monitor, camera monitor, those three names are interchangeable, but on your actual camera, it might have some functions where you don't need to pay more to have those on the external monitor. Does your camera monitor allow focus peaking, which is this when it shows focus peaking is it shows the outline of the part that is in focus, and you can change the different colors to see if red isn't working because you're in a brick area that has a lot of red tones and it's harder to see, then you can change the color to be white or green or blue or yellow. And that way you can always see what is in focus really quickly. And that's called focus peaking. Zebras, if you want to say it like that, just show like the parts of the image that are most bright or they're overblown, overexposed. And so as you can see in this image here, it would be that where the light's coming from and where the light is directly hitting against that wall, and where it starts to fade off, the zebras aren't really hitting the rest of it. but you can always change the sensitivity of those to show more or less exposure if you don't want anything to be over a certain exposure level. And then there's stuff like waveform, all these different waveforms and these histograms and these different things that show you color information or brightness information that you really helps to just see what the camera is actually doing instead of what your eyes are seeing, because sometimes our eyes can play tricks on us, and we might not be seeing exactly what we think we're seeing. So seeing these actual things and seeing if it's overexposed in certain parts or if it's underexposed too far to where it's not going to be seen is a really good thing to have on your monitor when you're setting up. Something called false color is another good thing to see exposure levels, and it'll have a different bar where pink might be completely dark where you're not seeing it if it's all the way down at 0 or lower. I mean, if it's at like 8 or lower, it's probably going to be super dark and have barely any information. But also if you get up into that little red bar, like 99 and above or something like that, you might have it be too bright to where it isn't having as much information. You never want it to go over 100. You never want it to be at 0, because then there's no information there at all. So false color on your monitor will show like in what range all these parts of the image are in, and it really helps to evenly expose your subject and just know if you're having any elements out of underexposed or overexposed in your image when you don't really like notice it as much when you're seeing it normally. So with all that stuff said, if you have those functions in your camera itself, you might not need to buy an external monitor that has those functions, that has those features, because you already have them in your camera. The catch is your camera needs to be able to send that stuff out to the monitor. The reason you use a monitor is because it's larger and it's better resolution, and you can see your composition more. You can see the elements and you can see the detail in your frame a lot better, especially focus. Depending on the monitor that you get, you can see focus a lot better than you can on the built-in camera screens in your cameras. But if your camera has peaking and it has all these other features, you need to also be sure that when you're attaching HDMI to it and sending that video feed out to your monitor, that it's going to also send out those elements like focus peaking and like the waveforms and all of that, because some cameras send it out with the video footage, and some cameras only send out the video footage and don't send out those extra functions. So if that's the case, you might need to go ahead and buy an external monitor that has those functions built in. Because if you're using focus peaking and you're trying to use it on your monitor, there's no point in having it in the camera and not having it in your monitor if it's not going to send it to the monitor and you're not gonna be able to see it. Then it's just, there's no point in that, because it's not going to be there. So you're going to have to look at your smaller, less not as a high resolution screen on your camera to do the focus anyway. So that's something to consider and think about when you're trying to look for an external monitor. And the easiest way to do that, if you don't have an external monitor but you already have a camera, is to just put in an HDMI cable into your TV and your camera, and then mess with those functions if your camera has those, and see if it displays on the TV. If it shows the zebras, the focus peaking, the waveforms, the false color on the TV, then you know that it's going to display that on the external monitor that you use. But if it doesn't, then you know that you might need to buy a monitor that has those functions built in. One of the main things you want to look for when you're getting a monitor is the color accuracy and the resolution. There's two things you want in a monitor, because you want the colors to look as close to what they actually look like as possible. Some LCD screens on the back of cameras don't have that much color information, don't have as much of a range, and aren't as dynamic, don't have as much of a dynamic range between darkness and brights. So it'll be a little bit harder for you to really get the sense of what it's going to look like just with using the camera screen. But if that you have a good external monitor that is color accurate and has a high resolution, then you'll be able to see the crisp details and the colors and what it actually looks like with all the fine details and all of that. Obviously, the biggest reason that you want a monitor is just to have a larger screen in the first place, is just so you can see the composition and the framing of everything better than you could on a smaller screen. And they come in different sizes. Some are like 5 inches, some are 7, some are like 10, some are 12. So it just depends on what you're trying to use it for. The ones that go on top of the cameras, I believe the most common are the 5-inch or the 7-inch. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's what I've heard. But I do know there's several different sizes, kind of like with any kind of screen you're getting for anything. There's going to be different sizes. So whatever you're using it for, whatever you need, obviously the bigger it is, the heavier it's going to be. So you might want to think about that when you're just trying to put it on your camera. You might want to get a smaller one that's still bigger than the screen you have currently. There's also monitors that allow you to import LUTs. And LUTs, you guys remember, that's just the lookup table. It's just a color scheme. Let me see if I can see. So basically in the monitor itself, when you are recording log or raw footage, you're going to have that very desaturated, milky, ugly looking stuff. Let me do this picture actually. So the one on the left, you're going to see more something like that when you're recording. And if you have a monitor that is able to upload a LUT or to have pre-installed LUTs, that will make it look more like the thing on the right. It's kind of like color grading in an instant. Of course, it's not going to look exactly the way you're doing it if you're going to do actual color grading, because that'll, you have way more customization with that. But a LUT will just get you as close as possible to the final outlook of how it's going to look when you're done. So when you're shooting in LUT, when you're shooting in RAW, you see this ugly footage that's very ugly, but it's capturing a lot of data so that you can do that color grading and later. But you want to be able to view what it's going to look like so you can set it up correctly on set. And so having a monitor that can do that is very beneficial, so that you can kind of get a sense of, okay, it looks something like this. This is what I'm going for. And then you can start to see if some things are too bright or too dark, because with this footage on the left, you might not notice it as well as you would on the footage on the right. And you're like, oh, that water right there all the way to the right, that's a lot darker than I thought it looked in the image over to the left. Let me put up my brightness a bit, or let me lower it down because I want the water to be darker and the sky to be darker than that. And so having a LUT pre-built in or being able to upload LUTs to your monitor is very good and a beneficial thing if you're shooting in RAW or log formats. Some monitors also allow what's called HDMI pass-through, and that's where it's not just, usually with every monitor, you're going to have the little mini HDMI plugged into your camera that's feeding the video out and into the monitor. So you'd put an HDMI in port into your monitor, and then you would have the footage coming from the camera showing you what's being recorded. But with pass-through, you also have on the monitor, we'll have HDMI out, and that'll allow you to plug an HDMI cable into it and feed that footage into another device. So if you have 2 different monitors and you have one for the director and he's over in the corner of the room, or if you're sending video feed to Video Village for somebody, or you're just sending it to another person on set, you can do that with a pass-through where you're plugging in one, it's getting the feed, and then you're plugging in another HDMI cable to it to plug into a different monitor so that all of the devices have the same footage at the same time. So if that's something you need, that's something you need to consider. because not every single monitor has that. They all have HDMI in, where they can receive the footage from the camera, but they don't all have HDMI out, which lets them send the video to another device. Some monitors, some external monitors are going to accept 4K signals. They might not be a 4K monitor. There's a difference between actually having the resolution of 4K on the monitor and just accepting the signals. 4K video sends out a different signal than just standard HD. So some monitors will accept those 4K signals and they will lower the resolution themselves to have it viewable. Or if you get a 4K monitor, of course, it'll just accept it and show it in its native format. But with the ones that are like 1080p resolution that show you 1080p resolution, they can accept those 4K, what is it called? Signals. They can accept those 4K signals, and then they will turn it into 1080p themselves. However, some don't do that. Some don't accept 4K signals, especially somewhat on the cheaper end or some of the older models, because 4K wasn't really prevalent at that point. If they don't, the camera that's shooting 4K usually can detect that the monitor doesn't accept 4K signals. And so they'll downscale the resolution for the monitor, and then the monitor will be able to show. So it's not really that big of an issue, but it will have your camera doing a little bit of extra work, which is typically something you don't want. You want the camera to be focusing on whatever it needs to focus on only. The more things it's doing, it's going to be working harder to do all these different things, using up more battery, and it's going to be possibly causing problems for other small things, like maybe focus peaking won't work as well because it's trying to do 3 different things at once. And the less things you're having your camera do, the better. And that's why it's usually good to have a monitor that can accept 4K signals, even if it's not a 4K monitor itself. So that's something to consider. And that was actually something James was talking about. He said he didn't have one that accepted 4K, and so it wasn't even going through because his camera didn't have that function to downscale it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's also, like I was saying, that's also BlackMagic is a because they're new, they they're not really hip and savvy to like everything else around it. Like, so like I remember the first BlackMagic I got, the first Pocket, the original, I had mentioned in another meeting. That one was 1080p, but it sent out an interlace signal when everything else was taking progressive.
Oh yeah, progressive.
It was just so weird. It was like the only camera I've ever seen that was like, oh, we're just gonna send out a random interlace. So like all the third-party monitors just didn't accept the signal. So it was like I had to find a monitor that accepted interlace and progressive at the same time. But also to add what you're saying with the downscaling of the from 4K to 1080, you're also talking about a frame. So like if your camera is shooting at 4K, but your monitor, and let's just say you're using your monitor to shoot, primarily to shoot, then you're losing out. You're not seeing the full picture, and you're gonna silly or a certain way because you think you have this when you actually have a wider shot because it's actually 4K.
Right. So the actual footage will be wider and taller than what you're seeing on the monitor because it's only seeing 1080p.
Yes.
They said most monitors have a de-squeezing feature if you're using anamorphic lenses. So you're going to be able to see what the final output will actually look like. Because if you guys remember when we were talking about anamorphic lenses, they squeeze the image to make it look very flat vertically. So then it looks like it's very flat horizontally. So then it looks like everyone's a little bit taller and way more skinny, and it just looks weird. And that's because they're doing a super wide shot with those lenses. The lenses itself is compressing it down. And so if you have a monitor that can actually de-squeeze it, you can see what the final image will look like while you're shooting. And you definitely need that because you don't want to make any mistakes and have anything that you don't want in there because you're not really noticing it, because you can't really tell what the footage exactly looks like when you're using anamorphic lenses unless you de-squeeze the footage. And so when it de-squeezes on a monitor, it might look something like this with the big black bars on top and bottom to just show you what all is being captured and how it looks when it'll get de-squeezed in the edit. So that's something to look at too and think about. Another thing is some monitors will come with this, or you can buy it separately, but it's like a sunshade. And that just helps whenever you're outside, or if you're in a bright area with a bunch of, if you're on set and you have a bunch of studio lights behind you, it'll help to block the light and stop it from getting on the screen, because you don't really want reflection on that screen. You want to make sure that you're seeing it as clearly as possible. So something like these sunshades, some of them come with the monitors already, like pre-packaged with it, and some you have to buy separately. So if you want this, you'd have to see if it comes with it, or if you might need to pay an extra expense. And if you're comparing two different monitors and one's $15 more, and you might just want to look at it and see, well, I'm going to buy a sunshade for this one anyway, and that other one comes with it, might as well just buy the package. If you're going to just go ahead and do that, because some of these are $20, $30, or maybe even more. And then, of course, just the screen itself, you want to see how reflective is that screen. Even with a sunshade, if it's very bright, if the sun is behind you and it's shining really brightly towards you, if it's like early day or later in the night when the sun's at that really curved angle, you just want to make sure like you are going to still be able to see the screen, because otherwise you'll see people when they have like these little black cloth they put over their head and they put over the monitor so they can see in sunny days. But sometimes that can get annoying and very hot. And so if you just have a screen that has less of that reflectiveness, less of the reflectiveness on it, then it's just better for any circumstance, so that you don't really have to use that cloth that you put over your head as much as you would if you have a very glossy screen that is very reflective. Another thing you have to think about when you're talking about an external monitor is the battery type that it uses. What kind of batteries does it use? Am I going to need to buy some? Am I going to need to buy a new charger for it? Most likely, yes. Some of them come with like, some of them use the same kind of camera batteries that the company is made from. Some of these monitors are made from the same companies that make cameras. And so they use the batteries that their cameras use. And so that's a good thing. If you already have that camera, then you can just use those batteries if you have extras, which hopefully you do. But you also want to think about how long that battery lasts for these monitors. And somebody pointed out that some of these monitors never truly turn all the way off unless you unplug them or you take the battery out. So generally speaking, you would like a monitor to turn all the way off instead of remaining in like it's kind of like a sleeping mode where it's still on and it's still draining that battery. It's just not using as much of its function. So it's not using as much energy. But typically speaking, you do want to be able to turn it all the way off if possible. That way it's not draining any battery and it's all the way cut off from any energy. So that's something to just like look at. But if the battery life lasts for a long time, then it doesn't really matter too much, but you definitely want to look into that and see how long those batteries last for it. And you also want to see, does it have an option to plug into a wall? Some do, some have those DC adapters where you can plug in the little cable and plug it into a wall outlet, and that's how it can be powered. And so if you're near an outlet, or if you're just doing something in a stationary room or something where you're doing maybe like a talking head, or you're doing a interview or something like that, where you're having the thing stay in the same position, then being able to plug it into the wall saves on battery. You don't have to worry about all that. and your batteries can be saved for later. So that's always a good thing if it has the ability to do that. And you want to think about, just like with pretty much every other piece of equipment in existence, you want to think about the kind of materials that it's made out of and how durable it is. Is it made out of cheap plastic where if you accidentally drop it, it's going to break and shatter into pieces? Is it made out of some metal or some very sturdy, expensive plastic or rubber parts? And does it have a rubber protector around it? And all these different things that you might find on it that help it to kind of like a phone case, where you're just making sure that it's not going to break apart or fall apart or break your expensive device, because you don't want to buy it, drop it, and then now you have to buy a new one, because then it's just double the price. So that's something else to consider when you're looking at these kinds of things. Another thing to think about is kind of like this one. You can see those little buttons on the bottom. Having buttons on it is actually a really good thing, because some of them have a bunch of buttons where like they have different functions. And when you are playing back the video, or when you are turning on focus peaking or those kinds of things, just being able to press a button in the front, like assigning that function to the button and then pressing it when you need it, is going to make it a lot quicker and a lot faster than just having to click on the menu screen or click on the menu button and scroll through to turn it on. So again, now it's about speed. That's about setting up very quickly. And so just having the buttons in the front is a plus. It's not really a requirement, of course. It's a bit of a extra thing, kind of like this. You can see it's function 1, function 2, function 3, function 4, and menu. And that way you can just click on it and do whatever function you need. You also want to research how much noise the thing makes, because some of them have a internal fan. Actually, probably all of them do, because they're a device, so they probably have something to release the heat. And you just want to make sure that it's not going to get loud even after hours or long periods of use, especially if you're doing long-term projects like feature films or short films where you're going to be inside somewhere all day doing it. You just want to make sure that it doesn't get louder, but also that it isn't very loud in the first place. So you check that out, see how much noise it's going to make, and if that's going to be a problem, review the thing before you buy it. And the other thing you want, whenever we're talking about like sunny days and things, so you want to have little to no reflectability if you can. You want to have that sunshade. If it comes prepackaged, that's great. If not, you probably want to get one. I mean, there's some that come like kind of like a little house, kind of like this around it, that really protects it from the sun. And there's some that are a little bit more simple that are just about 3 sides. You want to look at that. And then you also want to see how bright the actual monitor can go. If it can go brighter on a sunny day, it'll be easier to see things because you can just brighten up the screen. It's kind of like with your phone. If you go outside, it's really bright. You got to turn up the brightness to be able to see it the same way you would if you go inside and it's a bit darker. So same thing with a monitor like that. You just want to have it be able to get bright if you need it and be able to dim down if you need it. If you're working in the dark and very dark environments, you don't want the light to be bouncing off of anything. So you want to be able to also turn down the brightness quite a bit, or fully off, I guess, would be the last result. But you don't really want to do that if you can. You want to avoid that. But you just don't want that light to be reflecting off of anything, causing anything to look different than it should if it's supposed to be a completely dark room. And that's where dimming the LCD or the LED screen down would really help. So brightness, how dim it can go, both those things. And then going back to like just functions, most of them can do rule of thirds and, you know, the different camera aspect ratios. So most of them will be able to show you what that stuff looks like or what it will look like if you are planning to With the aspect ratios, if you're planning to make it a smaller aspect ratio than you're shooting in, you can see where you need to line up everything. And the rule of thirds, that's pretty much standard on everything. So you can just see where you want to line up the stuff. But I would be surprised if one didn't come with that, but just if it doesn't, it should be somebody mentioning it, because those are pretty standard for any viewing device for cameras. Again, B&H photovideo.com. I guess it's just BH on their website, but B&H has a article where they're talking about these monitors, and they're talking about what to look for and these different ones that they recommend. So if you are looking into maybe getting one, it's pretty much saying all the same stuff I did. Screen resolution, brightness, does it have a 4K input signal? Oh, what's the frame rate? That's something else. So the frame rate, if you're shooting at a high frame rate, like 60 or 120 frames per second, your monitor might not be able to keep up. And so you might not be able to see what it actually looks like when you're shooting it. And you could be shooting that to make it slow motion later, but you do typically want to see natively what it's going to look like in the frame rate you're shooting it at. So that is also something to consider. And then there's also OLED, which is the best kind of screen for this, because it has different pixels that can turn off or on. So you can have complete darkness in one part, complete brightness in another. So the dynamic range for the actual screen is very high, but they are a lot more expensive. And then, is it touch screen? I would actually probably not want a touch screen for mine, because I wouldn't want any of the oils from my hands to get on the screen and kind of reflect. But that's just a personal thing that I've just thought of right now reading that. And then, like I think Brian was talking about, some of these monitors can also record. So they can like actually record. Some of them can record at a higher resolution than your camera. So sometimes people will use just whatever camera, and then they will record it to ProRes 4K video or something like that. And they'll use a monitor / recorder for that. Of course, if it can have those capabilities, it's going to be a lot more expensive than just a monitor. But that is also something to consider if you are planning to get an external recorder, because you want to record at a higher resolution than your camera allows, but you don't have enough money, or you don't want to buy a new camera, then, and you're also looking into getting a monitor, then you might just want to get one that does both, because it might save you some money. Or there might be one that's a bit more functional than if you bought two different devices. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything to add for that? Actually, the last thing I was going to add for that is, I think I have a few. Some of the camera monitor brands you'll come across are Atomos, or I think it's Atomos, Small HD, BlackMagic Design. So they make those cameras. They also make some camera monitors. Feel World, Lilliput, and Elvid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are cool brands. All of them are cool brands. I don't know, like the monitors thing. For me, it's like, because I shoot Blackmagic, the back of the monitor. For me, you would mention something about a lot of the histograms and stuff like that, which is cool. Like for me, I always trust my camera more than I trust my actual monitor, just because it's the actual camera. So I trust the camera more than the monitor. But it is beneficial having an external monitor, specifically the more higher end cameras, because like when you're on production, you could swivel the monitor around. Like for this camera by Blackmagic, like whenever I have a client, I could swivel the monitor around, and somebody can stand next to me and view through that while I view through the camera's monitor, or I can have an external monitor hooked up to it. But external monitor, it's just for me, it's like an extra. When I'm shooting by myself, like it's just an extra thing I got to do. So I usually try to avoid it as much as I possibly can. But like if I'm on a bigger production where I have actual helping hands, and I actually have time to go through the process of setting up an external monitor, then I'll do that too.
Hmm.
And then for me, it's an extra battery as well. It kind of gets annoying.
Yeah.
I have a setup where I could pull through the power of. I have everything plugged into one battery, so I just use one bar and I can do that. But it depends on what kind of battery. If you have a good enough battery that can maintain all that for a decent amount of time.
Right.
But you had mentioned something about monitors get up to what, 8 inches or something like that, which is cool. And I used to think like, oh man, I want a bigger monitor so I can see better. And now I'm just like, I want a smaller monitor because they're lighter, they're more, smaller, they're not as big and whatever. I'm reverting back down. Like now I want something that's not so dominating. Like especially now you have a lot of these external monitors now are bigger than the actual camera, which is kind of crazy. So
Yeah. Yeah.
A smaller monitor and whatnot. And I think you had already talked about the functions that they can record and all that good stuff. I mean, that was a big deal back in the day when DSLRs were around, because it was like everybody wanted to shoot like raw and stuff like that, and DSLRs wasn't like giving that function, and have these monitors that had the ability to do that. That was pretty big. But nowadays it's like they're making these monitors that have all these features like the focus peaking and the histograms and stuff like that, but now the cameras are finally caught up with it, and they're like, oh, we already have all that stuff too, so it's like it's really no big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that like they did say like, oh, not everyone is gonna want or need a monitor. I feel like if you have like if you have a bigger set, it might be very useful if you're working with multiple people. I feel like if you're someone like me that can't see very well, depending on the size of the monitor of the camera itself, to have a second monitor would be helpful for me. To be able to get closer and not be constantly in the face of the camera. I do think it like they're like not every single person needs it. Not every single person needs it right away. And like you said, you don't always need the biggest one necessarily. But I feel like it's one of those things that's like, it's not, I don't think it's a necessity to have, but I think it's good to have. In my opinion, I feel like
It is.
Yeah, I think it's like it definitely depends on like the set you're on and all that. Like Brian said, like if you're on a higher budget set or you're just on a larger set with more people, it is really beneficial to have, because you can place it on a stand on its own and you can just put it over somewhere else so somebody can kind of be out of your way, especially if you're moving around with the
a
camera.
makeshift video village as well, like
something like that. So that's where the positives of it come in. But if you're just doing like solo shooting, like you were saying, or you're doing like something small and just not really like needing if you're not pouring a bunch of money into something, then you don't really need it as much. It's mainly just about like getting things more accurate, getting things more right.
Yeah.
Things like that.
I would say, especially if you're in the indie scene and you are shooting independently and like smaller stuff that you don't need all that equipment, the least equipment you bring with you that you actually need, the better, as opposed to like, well, I don't know, yes and no. Like it's good to bring extra stuff and to be prepared, but I just mean like from a perspective of someone who just wants to shoot one thing or a short thing, it probably would be easier to not have an extra thing to carry around unless you actually need it. So there's definitely, pros and cons. It really depends on.
I mean, there's pros and cons to all this stuff. Pretty much. I mean, the camera and the mics you gotta have, but like after you get the basic main set of equipment, then the rest is just kind of like you could do without it, but it's going to be a little bit more beneficial if you have it.
And it also depends on what area you're going into, like how for some people lighting isn't a big thing for them on their top tier list because they don't need all that lighting setup. They're probably doing more natural light shots and that kind of thing. To another person, it might be essential. So
yeah,
really does.
Because like Priscilla, you had mentioned a video village, and there's a guy I work with. He hires me for like small work, and it's like everywhere we go, he's got to set up this video village, and I'm like, dude, there's only 2 of us here. Like the 2 of us are like, why do we need a video? I don't need it. Like, but it just makes him feel, better, I guess, having this like these 2 big old monitors.
It makes it feel legit.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's only 2 of us. Like, I don't like. I'm like, what do we need this video village for? And for me, it's just like, fortunately,
it's more to take down. It's more to carry. Yeah.
Find a place to set it up first. Like, you can do it outside, and more batteries you got to waste. Indoor, you got to find a room to put it in because you don't want it to be in the way. But also, did you guys did you mention, you said something about small monitor? Did you guys talk about whatchamacallit, the wireless transmitters? So like the biggest thing with a lot of these monitors are HDMI connection, but then now they're having these devices where you can plug them into your monitor and it'll send it wirelessly to another monitor, or you can plug it into your camera and it'll send the signal to a monitor wirelessly. So you can be upstairs watching, just like in the movies where the director's upstairs or something like that. So I had mentioned something about like Hollyland there's a couple transmitters you can buy that does that. But I think it's Small HD has this new monitor where the transmitter is actually integrated into the actual monitor, so you don't have to buy the transmitter anymore.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a 2-part. It's like it's the monitor with the receiver. So all you have to do is plug the monitor into the camera, and it'll send a signal out to another monitor, or something. Something.
Yeah, that's definitely beneficial when you don't want the long cables going all over the place.
Yeah, it's an extra battery you don't have to. The last shoot I did, the DP had it. I was like, dude, I have to have it because like for my camera, it's let's see, the actual main battery, the monitor battery, and then the transmitter battery, and then that's like 3 or 4 different batteries all together just to get everything up and running. So like the less battery you have, the better. So
yeah,
that's the new thing now. That's the new thing to look for in monitors now. Does the monitor have a wireless transmitter capabilities? That's something.
Nice. And I think the other thing I would look for if I was going to look into that is, does it affect sound at all? Yeah, because wireless transmissions, when they're first starting out, sometimes they're not fine-tuned a lot, so sometimes they might start messing up sound if you're using a wireless sound system. But yeah, that's just something that's cool though. Vish, did you have something to?
Yeah, I was just curious, where this thing is going, because these days there are cameras are kind of coming beyond 4K, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering where this monitor technology is going. Are they having monitors which are catering to more than 4K?
I think they're starting to, but I think it's hard to. I haven't seen anything for like 8K or 6K or anything, but I've seen the largest I've seen so far is native 4K display. A lot of these, they'll, like I was saying, they'll accept the 4K signal, but they're not actually displaying it in 4K.
A lot of the reasons they explain that, why they're, like I was hearing someone talk about it, is because right now the monitor is so that you can see what it looks like, but you don't necessarily need to see all of those details. For example, like 8K cameras are not like widestream yet. 4K is the standard. So because a 4K monitor can pretty much help you see what you're filming and how the colors look and how it's looking just as good right now, they're not prioritizing you buy an 8K monitor right away.
It is kind of interesting though, like to think about, because I mean, can you even really view 8K on that tiny of a screen? Because I know like 8K is the more pixels and stuff, so it's like it's for being able to.
My vision's too blurry for that. Yeah, no.
You'd be able to appreciate it. That's the thing. The small. That's all it is. That's all you're doing is downscaling. So let's take your phone for example. So when 1080p came out, that's 1080, 1080 pixels condensed into, let's just take the standard 1080 screen.
720.
So that's 1080 pixels. And now your phone isn't going to be equivalent to that because it's so small, but there's an equivalency to it. They've downscaled it so it's equivalent. Your phone isn't actually projecting 1080 pixels. It's just enough. The number is equivalent to what would be 1080.
Yeah, but isn't there an argument to be made that you are using the monitor for filming and you're just using the 8K to have that extra crispness, not necessarily to capture every single detail ever that you necessarily need an 8K monitor?
It's not even about it's not about the crispness, it's about the frame. In order to truly appreciate an 8K or a 4K image, you would need a screen big enough to represent the pixels that are being squeezed into that monitor. So like 8K, you would need a wall or a theater. That's how big.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it doesn't make a difference then.
I mean,
right?
I think
so
the difference it would make is, like he's saying, downsizing it to the camera so that you can see the whole frame in the monitor.
No, yeah, but I'm saying for a filmmaker's perspective, for the perspective of someone like thinking, do I need this so that I can see the exact thing perfectly compared to my monitor, compared to my camera? And like, is it a necessity?
Well, that's what the monitor's for, isn't it? To look at the whole framing. So what do you
Yeah.
want to? So if you're
Will
shooting in
the
8K, you want to see what the actual framing of 8K is going to be, not if it's displaying in
Will the
1080.
8K make that big of a difference is what I'm saying. Is it a necessity?
Yes, you would be punched in really far into the footage, like in
You
the middle
already
of
have
the
it
footage.
on your camera though, if the 8K monitor is just supposed to be like a secondary monitor.
if you can't see your entire frame, it's going to mess up your shot.
Gotcha.
Right.
So,
So-
you would need a bigger monitor, right? Not like
No.
big, but like.
I mean, you'd have, like he said, you'd have to have a wall to be able to see the whole thing, so you can't have that.
No, I'm saying that if, like, preferably, since you're downscaling, in that case, it would be more recommended you purchase a bigger size monitor as opposed to a smaller one.
Well, it'd be like the 4K thing, right? Like right now, 4K is the most prevalent in these things. And because cameras are starting to shoot 6K and all of that, these monitors display it in maybe 1080p or 4K. And so they have to downsize it. And because of that, if they don't do it internally in the monitor itself, the camera has to do that. And that's putting extra strain on the camera.
Right. So the argument here is this, right? So you had older monitors. Let's say we have a small HD had an older monitor, which was 1K, right?
Mhm.
So it has the same aspect. It has some aspect ratio, right? Let's say 10 inches by, not 10 inches, but maybe 4 inches by 6 inches, right? I'm just assuming, right?
Right.
So now you have 4K. The aspect ratio is the same, right? 6 inches by 4 inches.
Right.
So, but the pixel technology has gone advanced, saying that, okay, what you were able to see on a 10K or 1K, you're able to see much more clearly on the same aspect ratio with a 4K technology, right? So the image is a little sharper, right? Of course, I think, if you go to 6K or 8K, which were the new Blackmagic, right? They are kind of making those frames accessible to to us, right? Like as against if you go ARRI Mini, which still shoots 2K, or if you go higher, ARRI, XT or something, right? They will shoot higher. Pixel count is going to be much higher. But for the Blackmagic, it's becoming more affordable. Now I think you can get 12K for the same price that you were getting 4K, 4K camera, right? So now it's becoming okay. You have a 12K or a 6K camera, but you don't have anything to look at, right? You can only
Right.
record at 6K. So the whole concept of this
Well,
camera,
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying like, well, if it was that big of a necessity, don't you think they would have jumped on that yet?
so,
No,
so
because anytime there's something new comes out, they have to catch up with it by like
Right.
first of all they have to
So
make it.
so
Gotcha.
the thing is this, right? You had the original evolution of these monitors, external monitors, came about because when you were shooting with DXLR or whatever viewfinder eyepiece, diopter it had, it was too small to see things. Not only that, I think it was very difficult to focus because you could never figure out, unless you had really sharp eyes. Even the big DPs kind of had difficulty trying to focus them. So they wanted like something which you can zoom into, or maybe zoom in the camera itself. But that feature, I don't know. I think some of the monitors have that feature where you can zoom in and basically focus, right? But now I think it's becoming more of like, okay, focus is one of the issues, but there are other issues like, the color reproduction, what you actually capture in the recorder. Is it the same that you are actually seeing, depending on what codecs is using, or, how the image processor within the camera is transferring the data into the recorder, right? Those things are becoming much more relevant now because technology is evolving. So it's like a pretty complicated stuff where when you go to higher, from 4K to 6K, you're kind of facing the same challenges that you had from 1K to 4K, right? Yeah. So that thing is also there.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, like I'm sure
I'm just
eventually
imagining
the monitors will catch up and they'll have
Yeah.
some 6K eventually, and then they'll go up to
Yeah.
12K, and they'll probably just like squeeze it down, but they'll accept those signals. That's the main thing is
Yeah.
those
Like I
signals
said,
are different than the
I work
4K
it.
than the 1080p, so they need to be able to accept that. And then it comes into like, because 12K, because 6K are so huge, it's really hard to send like what Brian was just saying. He was talking about how some of these are now what's it called? And now have
Downscale.
like what?
The downscale, right? Even if you have 6K or 12K, you still have to downscale to 4K because you
That
cannot.
too, but also if it's something like if it's a wireless setup, and it's
right.
like it's sending it out, then those files are too big to let it view currently what we have in our monitors. I think it's too big for those monitors to even be able to do that. So I think they're just now getting to the point where they can start doing that.
Yeah,
that
one thing which I
wireless
noticed,
connection for 4K, and so now they have to catch up to the next thing.
one thing which I noticed was in a lot of Hollywood productions, I've seen that they're attaching a monitor on the DP's back, and
Really?
yeah, they have this huge big monitor, and the DP's back is a Velcro there. It's stuck to the Velcro because these monitors or tablets have become so cheap that the director or whoever the crew is, they want to producer, they want to look at the they want to look at the footage that's been taken by the DP or the camera. They're able to see it in a bigger scale also. So I think that probably has to do with what Brian was mentioning, that you have a transmitter, which kind of hooks into the monitor, the bigger monitor, and then you can actually see the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's funny. I haven't seen that.
but I'm sorry, I didn't word it as well, and it was like a thought that was coming into my brain as I was trying to word it. So, but I think you guys explained it pretty well. I was just trying to understand, like, since it's already compressing because of 4K and stuff, if the 8K would have actually made that big of a difference visually speaking. But I think you answered it pretty well. But does that make sense? What I was trying to understand?
Yeah, I mean, if you understood it, right?
Yeah.
I don't, what you're asking, what you
No,
understood?
I said yeah. I
Oh,
just
okay, because I was trying to understand what you mean, because
I just asked if you
that's how I
understood
understood it, right?
what I
I don't
was
know. How
trying
did
to
you
ask.
understand?
I just asked if you understood what I was trying to ask because you seemed confused at first. Like what?
Oh no, I was just thinking about what I was going to say next.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. All right, so then moving on from that, a lot of the same types of things that we just talked about with field monitors are also going to apply for your editing monitor. And when you get a computer and you have a monitor, not all of them are the same. And if you've had two different monitors at any time, you'll know that some display colors very differently. Some are very more reflective. Obviously the size is different and the resolution is different, but just having a 4K monitor for your editing isn't always going to work the way you'd think. You need to be able to, especially if you are doing any kind of color grading, you need to make sure that this editing monitor, the monitor that you're using for your editing, is very accurate with its colors. Color
Yeah, so
accuracy. Sorry, go ahead.
I would like to add there is that editors, most of the times what they do is they would calibrate their monitor.
Mhm.
And so the field monitors are nowhere close to what the editor or the color grader would probably see on the actual monitor,
Mhm.
because they are much calibrated, and they actually would replicate the color contrast or the color gradient, which the footage would have more accurately than any other monitor. Even the editor monitor is not really that he doesn't need it, right? I mean, he doesn't really look at the frame content as such. He looks at the story flow. But the color grading guy, he has to be really, his monitor needs to be calibrated for the color gamut, which you're showing here.
Yes.
Based on that, it actually reproduces the the colors on the set, because the costume designer basically has come up with a color profile, and he knows exactly what the costumes were made. But the guy who's doing the color grading, he has no idea what kind of this thing was there, right? Because
Right.
he was not on the set and he hasn't seen the costume. But for him, what he sees would be totally different. That's why I think most of the color bars, right, that you shoot early before you're on set, before maybe quite frequently, during the mornings or afternoon, wherever you go to a new set, you have a color bar. So that calibrated to the monitor, which the color grading person colorist is going to be basically using. So it kind of ties in there with that calibration. That's
Yeah,
why
definitely. You have to make some monitors have more color ability. It's kind of like with a camera. I'm just going to point that out while I'm on that topic. So, we were talking about 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit bit depth for the colors in a camera that it can record. And then you can see like an 8-bit, it can do like 16 million possible colors. And then 10-bit, it goes up exponentially to like a 1 billion colors. The same thing is with a display. Any kind of display that you have will have a certain amount of color information it is able to display. And that'll make it have those possible colors. And so exactly like what Vish is saying, like every time you have a monitor, whoever's doing the color grading they need to calibrate their monitor to match it as closely as possible to the colors and get it like as neutral, I guess I would say, as like you can. And that way it will be as accurate as possible. But within the actual computer itself, it also has some color information that might not be in one monitor over the other. So there's also that to look into. You also want to try to get, because obviously the higher bit the bit depth of the colors that it has, the better it is, even though you might not be able to really see past like 1 billion to 68 billion. It'll just have more to display that you can that will be a bit more accurate. Basically, like a 10-bit will definitely be better than 8-bit, but going from 10 to 12, you don't see as big of a jump, pretty much. You have anything to add, Vish?
Yeah, so yeah, this is good example, I think. So you have like, let's say if, the maximum you can go up to is 24 bits. I think the one which underneath you is maybe 16-bit or something. But let's say if you go 24 bits, right, the camera is crunching, basically capturing frames at the rate of 24 bits for each pixel, right, representation. So that's like so many billion colors, right? So camera is big enough to do that. It's got like, cooling, it's got the processor and stuff like that, right? Whereas the field monitor might not have stuff like that because field monitor is so small, right? And if you have stuff, if you have processing power, which is going to create the 12 bits, that field monitor is going to get really hot for the size it is, right? I mean, camera, of course, has a lot of, like if you look at, if you heard of red cameras, right? Red cameras are get pretty hot, and the fan goes. They used to have a big problem where the fan used to just start buzzing, right in the middle of the shoot, because it was getting so hot with whatever the crunching they were doing for the frames. But the same kind of, but for a 24-bit image, if you have a computer, right? I mean, or a laptop, whatever the workstation that you have, that workstation has the capability to crunch it 24 and be able to represent it onto the monitor with quite a bit of less ease because it's got a big system, it's got a big monitor, sitting in an AC, everything is cooled off and everything is working fine, right? So that aspect is also there. So generation of that image and then the reproduction of that image is where I think the two meet, and that's where I think you get the true replication of the color that you can get on the final DCP kind of output that, or whatever you're doing, DCI, intermediate places where you're doing modification of those frames, right? That's also comes into the picture there. So there, you want to have as much replication or as much accuracy of what you're capturing in the recorder.
Right. Yeah. Right. And then moving on from color. Actually, I don't think I have a picture for this one, but so when you're getting a computer editing monitor, you don't want to just look at best monitors and pick one and do that, because some of these monitors are used more for other things like gaming. Gaming's huge. So monitors, when you see like the best monitors of 2022, a lot of those might be geared more towards gaming, and gaming is more geared for like higher refresh rates and things like that have less input lag, because they want to be as speedy and as smooth as possible, seeing like the high refresh rates of their games. Where so they might have something called a TM panel, and they're a lot worse for editing than what is then called an IPS panel. IPS panel monitors, they have a better angle of view, which means so angle of view is like if you're looking at the screen from the side or a little bit to the side, if you're at the corner of the screen looking at it, the colors are going to maintain the same, or it's going to look very similar to what you'd see in the middle, compared to a narrow angle of view where there's like one spot that's really good, and then when you start turning or getting out of that great spot for the colors and the accuracy of the screen, the colors and the exposure, I don't know if I'd call it, the brightness levels kind of drop. So you want a screen TM panels, they're better for gaming, but they are more narrow angle of view. So it's more like you have to be in that one spot for the perfect look of, you know, for the most accuracy of how it's supposed to look. If you're going off to the side of the screen a little bit, or if you're stepping out of the way even a little bit, looking at it from any kind of angle, that might adjust the colors to your vision, and then you're seeing it differently than you are in the sweet spot, pretty much. And then the IPS panel, they have a wider angle of view, so that whenever you are, if you do lean to the side, or if you know, step off to the, or if you have two people, if you have somebody looking at it as well, you want them to see what you're seeing and not see the colors or the brightness differently than what you are seeing. So you want that panel to be able to, if you have somebody you're showing it to, like a client especially, or you have the director come in and look at it, you want to be able to show them and they see what you're seeing. So IPS panels are usually used more for editing, where TM panels are used more for gaming because they have higher refresh rates and things like that, but they have that narrower angle of view. Then you want to look at whether it's a matte or a glossy, matte or a glossy finish display. Matte is going to be typically better for editing because it's going to be less reflective. The matte would be on the right, where the glossy finish would be on the left. So if you see the glossy, it's reflecting a really crap ton. And the one on the right, it's a little blurry. You can see a little bit more brightness on the top, but it's definitely not as noticeable and as in the way as that glossy finish. So if you can, a matte finish for your editing monitor would be better. You also, of course, if you can, get a 4K resolution, especially if you're going to be editing in 4K, then you want to be able to see what it actually looks like. You got to have that 4K monitor. So 4K resolution for your monitors is pretty much a must if you're trying to shoot or do anything in 4K. And also, well, so what they said is generally you want it to be 30 inches or more. The screen size, you want it to be 30 inches or more if you're viewing 4K, because if you're getting a smaller monitor, 2K or less resolution is fine. It's going to show you the same thing, because if you get, I think we were just talking about this with the field monitors, it's kind of the same thing. The smaller the screen is, it's going to look different with higher resolutions on a small screen compared to like a screen big enough to display it and how it naturally would be looking. So the bigger the screen is, the higher resolution you need to have that same image look good compared to a smaller screen, which is why phone screens don't typically have that high of resolution, because they don't need it. Their screens are so small that it's going to look good with 720p or 1080p or you know, I don't know if they're doing 4K now, but it doesn't need as high of a resolution as bigger screens. So they say if you're going to get 4K, try to get something like 30 inches or more. If you're going to get something like 27 inches, then you might want to get something that's like 2K or 3K if they do that. And then if you get even smaller, then standard will be fine. You'll still see the 4K, how it's going to look. It's just you're not going to see it on a 4K display pretty much. But having a 4K small screen, you're not really going to be able to see the differences, really, they say. They also say, you know, aspect ratio for the screen itself is another thing. And that's just up to preference. But many of the people, well, this guy, Potato Jet, which is I in the videos, he said he likes 16:9 just because it's, you know, basically it's just like a TV. Most of them come in 16:9, and that's just the most natural way of looking at these things that we're used to. And it incorporates all these different aspect ratios like we looked at when we were talking about aspect ratios, so you can see everything on that screen. So it's just better than those super wide angle views. They're a little bit harder to, they're not really necessary. At least he says, in his opinion, they're not really necessary to have those big wide or like those curved screens, because they're not really going to do that much of a difference. If you have a big screen, the timeline's going to be able to stretch across the whole thing, and you're not really going to notice, or you're not really going to need the really super ultra wide screens. Plus, those are way more expensive. So that's what he said. Another thing with monitors for editing is like how truly black their pixels or their screens can go. Again, screens are made differently. So some screens are better with dynamic range and lighting. And some screens are better with the colors, but you try to find one that has both if you can, because how dark it can go, you want to see, like, if it's pure black in your video, you want to try to have it look as pure black as possible on your screen to match what it will actually look like. Because when it goes to an OLED TV screen or something like that, those have those truly black pixels. And if your video wasn't truly black, then it's never going to be truly black for those devices that can view it as that. So if you can get a monitor that has that, and again, same thing with the field monitors, it's also about how bright it can go. So can it go very bright, and does it have quick options to turn it down a little bit dimmer if it's getting a little bit too bright in the room, just so you can view it at a natural level. If you're in a really bright room, you're going to need to brighten your screen to see it as well as you would if you had a lower, dimmer view in a darker room. Also, if you want HDR, high dynamic range, like I was just saying, the capable monitor, it's better for a higher dynamic ratio where you can see a lot more darks and brights in the same image, where it's showing how far it can go from dark to bright without it clipping or without it cutting and getting out of that and losing all the information. So where you'll still be able to see it pretty much. And some monitors will kind of raise the darks, and they'll lower the brights just so that everything can still be seen, but then you're not really truly seeing what it looks like if you have a screen like that. So that you want to have a monitor that has a high dynamic range if possible, so that it can show you the darks and the brights at the same time without bringing the brights down or raising the darks up at all. There's a thing called PPI, which is the pixel density. And that's just basically the more or the higher that number is, that means it's the better. So if you're looking at a few different price ranges and you're seeing like the same kind of monitor at the same price range, if one has a higher PPI or more pixel density, it's typically just means that's a little bit better, because it's going to be able to display it a little bit nicer. The pixels, each pixel it has, well, that's where the dynamic range also comes in. Is if a dark pixel is next to a bright pixel, the more pixels there are in between, it's going to be easier for it to have one be bright, one be dark, instead of meeting it somewhere in the middle if it has less pixel density, because then it has to account for all the stuff in between. And there's something called the Delta E range. This is actually from George's Camera TV. This is Kay in the videos. He talked about it. Delta E range, it's just the lower this number is. It's something to do with, its formula and how it displays color and all that. But basically, what you want to know is the lower that this number is, the closer to 1 it is, the better. Because it's for colors, it's basically the accuracy as it can show colors. 2 or below is considered really good. So as long as it's something 2 or below, you should be fine. But you don't really want to get something that's like 4, 6 or something like that, because it won't be able to display those colors as well, as accurately. And then another thing that some monitors come with, like editing monitors, they come with those sunshades, just like the field monitors you might get. And that's for the same reason, just to block light from the ceiling and the sides so that you can view, you don't get any reflection off of the monitor, pretty much. You want to be able to see what the monitor is and not any reflection coming off it, thinking something's more bright than it is. And then like Vish was saying, like everyone who has a monitor, no matter even if it's good for editing, you're still going to have to configure it. And they say the longer you use it, even if you configure it, the longer you start using it, if you've used it for like a year or two without configuring it, it's going to start basically veering away from that configuration. So it's just like it just happens. So you want to reconfigure it every so often so that it stays as accurate to those colors as possible. And there's like some softwares and stuff that you can do that with, some apps, things like that, that you can get that make it a lot easier to set up the configuration so you don't have to figure it all out yourself. But I think that's it. I had a website here, B&H. Again, B&H does another website where they're talking about the different things. I'm pretty sure I mentioned all of them, but let me just check. Screen size, screen resolution, supported video resolutions, panel types, HDR, high dynamic range, color support with the gamut, the color depth, and the chroma subsampling. The connectivity, that's another thing. You want to make sure that you can connect it to your computer, first of all, and that it's going to be functional with all your other devices. Dual monitor setup, display tools, and calibration. And then they even talk about calibration. So if you want to, you can go in that and kind of read over what I just was talking about, especially if you're looking for an editing monitor. Some of these can be very expensive. You know, I've seen some for like thousands and some for like 500, 600, 700, 800. It's a wide range in price. So I would just look into it and kind of see which one you think you need, especially again, if you're doing any kind of color grading, if you're planning to do any of that, or if you want to practice with that, it's just better to have a more accurate computer that's calibrated so that the colors are going to be what is being seen. So it looks good on all of these devices that you output it to. So if you don't have it calibrated, some computers, they have more of a magenta hue, some have more of a green hue. And so if you're editing with that and you don't notice it, then you're going to think your video is a little bit more magenta or a little bit more green. And then you will adjust the colors to make it not look not look that way. But then it's going to look weird on all the other devices it's displayed on. And that's because the device you're editing on has that that weird color in it. So that's why calibrating it, making it as neutral and natural as possible is important, because all these other devices like TVs, phones, they all have their own, and they're going to look a little bit different from each other. But you just want to make sure that whatever you're editing, you are editing it as accurately to what it looks like as possible, so that you don't change anything that's going to be different. It's the same thing with like the sound when we were talking about listening to the audio, and you want to make sure that your audio is not turned up too loud or too quiet, so that you're not raising the volume or lowering it, as well as making sure that you're not adjusting the bass and stuff if you have your bass turned down on your headphones, for instance. So with that said, for editing monitors, some of the brands that have some of the best, they say, is Dell, LG, BenQ. I've heard a lot of things about BenQ. ISO or ISO, I don't know how to say that one. Acer, Scepter, and MSI. Those are some of the brands you'll find if you're looking for monitors specifically for editing. Those are some of the ones rated with some of the best color accuracy and things like that. Does anyone have any questions or things to add on editing monitors? And again, if you have a monitor already, like Vish was saying, like if you just calibrate it, you will get pretty good colors. You won't get as good as if you buy one specifically for this. But if you're not doing the color grading yourself, you probably don't really need it. It would be nice to have, but I mean, if you're just doing the picture edit and you're going to send it off to a color gradist, then they can have the color accurate computer, and you can have one that's pretty close because they're going to be editing it with color.
I remember that Apple used to use LG monitors for their high-end, display monitors. Lately, although I think they kind of took the what did they call the panel, right? The panel is basically made by only few manufacturers, and different people kind of companies use that panel to build the TVs around it, like the LCD, LED, whatever, right?
Right.
Those panels are manufactured by only few people. So what they did was, for the Apple, they were using LG monitors for a long time, right? I think it's like Hyundai or LG or Samsung. There are a couple of people who only make those OLED or panels. They have big manufacturing out there, and rest of the companies basically take those panels and essentially build the TVs around it. So LG had its monitor for a long time, and I noticed that on Apple stores, I would see these LG monitors with iMac. Until recently, I think maybe like a couple of years back, they started with their own Apple monitors, which they
Are
were.
they good?
Apple monitors. So I think the panel is exactly the same. What they were using, what LG was using, right?
Yeah,
But
from what I've heard, their system is what people get annoyed by.
Yeah.
Like the controls and stuff like that. The
Right.
monitor.
So one of the biggest things in this monitor business, if you look at the smart TV, right? Smart TV's selling points are essentially how crushed the blacks are.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at between Samsung or Sony and which is the other LG monitors, or a couple of others, not Dell, I think big screen TVs, right? Biggest contention is how good the blacks are. They're basically fighting. These blacks are good for this
There's
monitor,
also
better
the
than that.
fact, honestly, there's also the fact that we have to consider that a lot of these monitor companies are manufactured by the same, like Apple. Until recently, Samsung was the one doing their monitors, or was it LG? One of the two
That's
was
what
doing
Vish
their
just
monitors.
said.
Exactly, that's what Fish is saying. So at the end of the day, when you really think about it, an Apple product is like a bit overpriced for the same monitor you're getting on an LG monitor. So that's something to consider as well. Like, you're getting the same exact screen, just
Right.
with the markup price because it's Apple. So
It's Apple everything.
I like my Apple products. I'm just saying that is something to keep in mind, because sometimes
It's
they're a little
gimmicky. Yes.
they're gimmicky. I mean, we all remember the cheese grater incident. So if you guys don't know, it's their PC, like their console thing. It looks like a cheese grater, and then they sold wheels for like, I think, what was it, like $70 for a wheel, or even more, something like that, just for wheels for the thing. So yeah, some things, it's just name recognition, and in this industry, name recognition, the name alone can end up making it more expensive, I think, from what I've seen.
Yeah, well, the monitors themselves, I mean, I don't know, maybe you're right, but the some of them are really just made for that specific reason of being color accurate.
But I know people that will swear by the Apple system, and they will buy like the little PC, like the square, I forgot the name of, or like the PC system itself, like the box, and then just buy a secondary monitor and edit like that. So that's
That's another thing. Whenever there's a color grader, I mean, they typically will have multiple screens. It won't just be the one, even if they have a color calibrated, color accuracy monitor, they will also have like a TV or a second monitor that's not as color accurate, and they'll be seeing it on all of them at once so they can see what it looks like on the different monitors, not just color accurate monitors. So there's also that.
Right.
But I feel like monitors, it's a tricky thing, because it's like Fish said with the whole like how black is black, different color gamuts. And I feel like I remember that one of the videos said that as well, that like even if the description of the product is like a specific number, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be perfectly accurate or it's going to be exactly the same. Like numbers aren't as accurate as people think they are or something like that.
Mhm.
So it is kind of tricky because you have to look at color accuracy, but even when you're looking at different monitors that say that they have the same color accuracy, sometimes they'll have different brightness levels or different saturations, and you'll be like, wait, don't they have like the same specs, yet they look different?
Well, color isn't brightness, so.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that you can have all of the same settings on two different monitors and they can still look somewhat different, like by a tiny margin.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so there used to be a system, back in the days, they were the printers, right, the color printers, right, which were used for magazines. They used to follow a system called CMYK. Right, it's like a cyan, magenta, I think yellow and black. So that print used to be, they used to say that it was pretty accurate. And most of this printer used to run it through the Apple workstations or Apple computers, right? Because Apple somehow had nailed down the color reproduction, through its processing within their computers or workstations, unlike what the PCs used to go through. So there was this contention of RGB that came into existence because of the way the TVs used to work, right? Because they would have these red, green, blue guns on the primary colors, and they would shoot on this fluorescent tube, and they would reproduce those colors which are coming in there. So that kind of followed through, and even though the times kind of changed, you had like RGB concept still in place for the cameras. So
Right.
they were going in two different directions. The print media was going in one direction, the TV was going in another direction. So it's fascinating how the evolution of these color. So they had like a common thing which they would relate to, and that was the color gamut. So they would try to reproduce whatever they could reproduce with CMYK with exactly, the same reproduction using RGB. But the problem with RGB was that you have to internally mix these red, the intensity of red, green, and blue
Mhm.
to generate those colors, right? So that means that in olden days it used to be like you can have an intensity of RGB to basically generate a combination of those colors to generate maybe a cyan or a yellow or a black. They were able to do that.
Mhm.
But with the digital technology now, they have to do a lot of mixing to exactly get the same color that the print media was getting. So
Right.
this calibration process and this process of accurately replicating what they see on the sensor, right, is become like a humongous task and developed into a lot of number crunching, or the frame grabbing and frame manipulation.
I think that's why DIT that position came up, right? Because they were
Right.
needing to do like, holy crap, we can't do this as the camera operator. We need someone else to do this because this is like a lot.
Right. So which is very very clear and clean in when you're doing film, right? Because film has a what is that? Cyanide or halide, right? Halide
Oh
crystals.
yeah, for film stock.
Right. Halide
Right.
crystals are basically, the exposure changes that halide crystals to a certain luminescence, right?
Mhm.
And that's exactly same like the monitors used to be, like the picture tubes, right? Where you would have this RGB shooting to the pixel and then reproducing a certain color. So in the film, it was very similar, because the film stock would basically go through the same process, so they can process it whichever way, whether you want to go bluish or you want to go reddish, warm color or whatnot, right? Blacks crushed and so on and so forth. But in the digital domain, the thing all changed. It's become so, evolved that you could do a lot more things than you could possibly do on a film, because film is a lot of color spectrum wise, as long as you're not, what do they say? You can never overexpose a digital camera, but you never expose a film camera, right?
Mm.
So something like that, I think. So basically, I think it's as long as your exposure is there, you can do stuff with it. If you not really have dark, and then you cannot really do because there's no difference between black and blue, right? Because they're both going to be appearing the same way. Whereas in a digital camera, as long as you don't overexpose it, you're basically going more towards white. You can really do a lot with the picture. So underexposed, this thing you can manipulate the brightness. At the same time, you can manipulate the color that you can get. So there's different directions. I think both, all of them went, but eventually converging to a single point where color production became much of a bigger a challenge on the digital, and you could also do a lot more with the digital thing. That's why I think the color graders or colorist kind of surfaced, became a lot more important for filmmaking.
Yeah,
They wanted
definitely.
to- Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
crossing.
Yeah, because it's like it's definitely a whole other skill set again. Just to have like to be able to truly understand it too, you have to like really delve deep into it, because there's just so
Yeah.
much to it that adjusts, like the screen, the camera, what it was shot at, what color did they do,
Yeah.
all the stuff you were mentioning. Like it just changes a lot of it. So you have to kind of figure out, well, where's the medium?
So for reference, back in the days when they had the picture tubes, they used to have one board for color red, one board for blue, one board for green, right? And then they'll basically reproduce that. Now that concept is not there, right? I mean, you're talking about frame, and then you get a pixel, which is of different colors. You can have on the same frame all different shades of colors, different gradients of color, different gradients of black. The grayscale is completely different. So it's all captured on the same frame, and the data is kind of transferred. You don't really have to split it into different colors as such, but the concept is still there, that you're kind of focusing on RGB and then try to generate different different colors from that.
Right. Actually, I'm gonna bring up one thing, because we're talking about colors. One thing I forgot to mention is seeing. While looking at the videos of those different editing softwares, I could see why DaVinci Resolve is used as a standard, because they have like a lot of these functionalities for color grading that I was kind of like, oh wow, that's really cool. They can block out certain exposure levels so that it's only focused on the highlights or the mids or certain color that they want to change. So it's only if we wanted to change in this image on the right, and we might just pick this green color, and that's the only thing we want to change the color of, and then it's only changing the building. I just thought that was like, oh wow, I can see why it's used more than like everything else, because everything else tries to use like the whole screen to change the color. And DaVinci Resolve, you can really like highlight certain elements. I know the guy in the video, he like changed the grass from being some of it brown, some of it green, and he just made it all the same color by telling the software which color to change it to. I was like, oh wow. And it didn't change the rest of the image, just the grass itself. But anyway, moving on from that, we're going to talk a little bit about parallel editing. This will be the when we watch our next film, we are going to be watching Inception, because they do parallel editing a lot in it, and they display it very well. It's very prominent, and that's what we'll be doing our next editing style exercise on. We'll be doing something with parallel editing, where like we record our own clip and do parallel editing with it. So parallel editing is it's showing two or more scenes that happen simultaneously or seemingly simultaneously. So it could be used as a misdirect to make it seem like that's happening at the same time when really it's happening in the past or the future, or they're just in different locations, different areas, but it's making it seem like they're going to converge. But it's also used to actually have them converge, and show that these two things are happening simultaneously, so that it's not surprising or caught off guard when a character appears in the scene, because we've been seeing them, that what they've been doing during that same time as the character we're watching, and we're jumping back and forth between the two. One of the picture in this image that's showing parallel editing is something in Silence of the Lambs. This is one of those misdirects where it was the police, and you thought that the police might be at the door where the guy was. Oh, this is spoilers, by the way, if you haven't seen it. But police are at the house. They're coming, and then we see inside. We see the guy, the serial killer, and it seems like the
Which,
cops
if you
are
have
out.
Silence of the Lambs yet, that's on you. It's been like 20 years. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're cutting back and forth between the cops and the killer on the inside of the house. And so it seems like they're right outside, and they're getting ready to bust down the door and get him and capture him before he kills this lady. Not the lady in the picture. It's actually another lady that he has in his house. But it ends up being that the lady on the left actually ends up at his house, the serial killer, and she doesn't know that he's the serial killer. And so it was a misdirect, making us think that the cops were at the correct house when really they're
Wait,
at the
what?
wrong location.
No, honey. She suspects that he might be, doesn't she?
She doesn't know for sure. I just said she doesn't know for certain that he's it. Otherwise, I doubt she would go alone.
Well, remember that she was going alone because they weren't listening to her or something like that.
Okay, maybe you're right. I don't know. But either way, the misdirect is that the cops, it seems like they're right outside the house. And then it ends up being that they're at the wrong location. So they bust in and they see that that place is empty. And then they realize that she went to the right location.
So they play the whole scene as if they're there and they're going there. And then you find out that she's going there and they're going somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's parallel editing, showing the simultaneous.
I think what happens is that she goes to that girl's house and she finds something there. So she rushes.
Right. Was it? Wait a minute. No, it was his basement. Right. She goes to her house first, sees something. Gosh, it's been so long.
Yeah.
I don't remember. Go ahead. Sorry.
And these guys are doing a different mission and checking out the other place, where she figures out, okay, this thing is, so she may be at this location. So that's why she kind of takes off. That's my recollection. I could be wrong.
Right.
It's been so long.
Either way, the main thing about the parallel editing is that it was a misdirect to make you feel like the cops were getting ready to bust in and capture the guy, and if they were actually at the wrong location. But because they cut between the cops and the guy inside, we just put it together in our heads that, okay, they're right outside, they're getting ready to get him. And this, it wasn't used as often as it is now. So now sometimes viewers will start to guess that that's the case because they've seen this happen. But back in the day, around this time and earlier, it it wasn't used as often. So then it was more of a surprise.
That was one of the first
Yeah.
uses of it or something like that.
Right. One of the uses for that misdirect. Parallel
Yeah.
editing has been used a lot, but for using it to make you think that something's
Yeah.
getting ready to happen that doesn't, this was one of the, this is a popular movie that did it early on. And I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the popular ones that did it where you weren't expecting it to happen.
It was one of the first ones that did it in that genre. Yeah, in that.
And I think it's kind of does also create it's a good tension building tool.
Yes.
Kind of creates that suspense, and
Yeah, because you
as it
freak
is-
out when you find out.
Because
they're
you
not
make
gonna-
it makes it feel like they're
Right.
getting ready to get caught, especially if you're on the side of the people that you don't want them to get caught, and it's making it seem like
Right.
they're getting ready to. You're like, you get glued to the screen because you're waiting to see what's going to happen. Are they going to catch her? Are they going to not? And
Right. So it's like it's almost like she's inside this house and these guys are outside, and she's in trouble, and we are looking at the whole the two sides of the picture, and we're saying, okay, are they going to make it to her? Before this guy gets to her, right?
Yeah,
And
before
you're
he kills
already
her.
building, you're already building the tension, and then you finally find out they break in and they're at the wrong place.
Somewhere else.
It's like
yeah,
a
you're
complete
like,
disaster.
Yeah. So parallel editing can be done just like that. It can be done for dramatic purposes, showing, like I just said, like showing people trying not to get caught. Maybe they're having an illegal meeting, they're exchanging some weapons or drugs, and we're cutting back and forth to them and the cops trying to figure out where they are and where it's taking place, and they're on their way. And then either they can show that the cops actually are there and we see what happens at the confrontation. Do they capture them? Do they have a shootout? What happens? Or they do something like a misdirect where they made us feel like the cops were almost on them, almost there, but they weren't. They were either at the wrong location or they went to, it's a different time. There's also been parallel editing. I think it was in Saw, where again, it was a serial killer inside and it was the cops,
Yeah,
the detectives.
and figure out.
They were trying to find him, and we felt like he was going to get busted. And when they went into the place, they were a few minutes or a few hours in the future compared to the other scene that we were watching of the serial killer inside. So then it's like, oh well, they're super late to it. They weren't getting ready to
Then
catch
there was
him.
one where
That
it
happened
was
a while ago, what we were seeing. But that way of parallel editing made it feel to the audience like it was happening at the same time.
I will say though, if I can just say this, I feel like a lot of people are worried that we can't use that as much anymore because people are going to figure it out. And I'm a very picky, annoying person that tries to guess everything while I'm watching the movie. I have seen it. When it's done well, it can still surprise you as long as it's not overdone or overly obvious or an aha moment, like they're trying to catch you or something. Like if it's actually done in a creative, organic way, it can actually still be really good, because a lot of people think, oh, that was overused, and it was for a while, and people started using these misdirects in somewhat of a lazy way to where it started becoming a little over obvious. But I still think that there's a way that you can do it really well to where you can still capture those emotions. But there's also a way you can screw it up completely, no matter how you splice it. You can
And that's
still
with
make
anything in it. That's with anything in the movie. You can,
No,
you
I
can
know.
go
I'm just
for
saying, 'cause I know
something.
that in particular is something that people worry about being overused.
Well, that's only with the misdirect version of parallel editing. And that doesn't have to always be the case. You don't always have to trick the audience into thinking it's happening at the same time or it's happening in the
No, I
same
know. I'm
location.
talking specifically of that misdirect type of thing.
Got you. Because you said parallel editing, which is
Right.
all
sorry.
encompassing of just showing
You're right.
two scenes happening at the same time, no matter what they are. The cops could be right outside the place. It's just to build tension so you know what's going on, and so that it's not like, where did the cops come from? If you're just watching the inside and all of a sudden cops are in there, you're gonna be like, what? Where did they come from? Who called them? But if you're watching their scene play out where they figure out where that guy is, they're going there, and then they actually get in there and catch him, it just makes more sense, and you're not taken by surprise, or you're not like, this is stupid. You think you you've already had it in your head what was getting ready to happen. But this can also be used not just for dramatic purposes, it can be used for comedic reasons as well. You've probably seen a lot of the times where after characters go on a date in a romantic comedy or a sitcom or something like that, you might have some parallel editing going back and forth between how the two people thought the date went. One person might think it went great, one person thinks it went awfully, or one person likes the things that the other person didn't like. And so it shows that contrast of what they thought went well in the date and what they thought went negatively.
Whether-
And then you're seeing that both of them think exactly oppositely, but they both think they're right for each other. And that adds that comedic element.
Whether you love it or hate it, I feel like the early seasons of How I Met Your Mother did this really well for a comedic effect. Like the writers loved doing parallel editing to like show different perspectives of the characters or different characters telling the story or going back and forth between a flashback and a flash forward. And it served really well as a storytelling. I forgot the word, but basically for storytelling purposes, they did a really good job to keep you engaged. And it was very creative and it helped in the comedic effect.
Mm-hmm.
I would think, like Breaking Bad, I think of it, beginning to think of that, TV series. I think I get a big feeling that they used quite a bit of it, even for comedic effect and comedic, and also for the serious.
Yeah, and if you
mix
see
and match, right?
Yeah, they did.
I think you're right.
Yeah, there's a lot of. They would
like that one with the when Jesse was super high and
right.
these boys knocked on the door and he saw these big muscular guys and they were gonna beat him up, but really they were like little kids, Jehovah's Witnesses or something, or cookies or something like that.
Yeah, it had like really interesting moments of comedic releases with tense moments. I think that the whole series was about, but very beautifully
done. Parallel editing can also be done to add excitement and that tension, especially to an otherwise dull or maybe boring scene. The Godfather did this very well, and I don't know exactly what was happening at this moment. I just remember, I believe his baby was getting baptized in the church, and he's in there getting his son baptized, and it's all peaceful and calm and about God and all of that stuff. But then he has all his men taking out the other mob members. And so we're seeing these two contrasting views on like this ideology of faith and belief and love and God compared to like death and killing and bloody. And
it's supposed to be sacred and holy and a time of peace. And then you contrast that with the violence and the anger and revenge and all that.
Right. And so if you just watch the scene of him in the church, it would be a little more boring than seeing what's happening while that is taking place. But it's also for that contrast to show that what's really happening and what he's being
the duality,
in there.
Family and the business as well. That was a good way of showing the parallels.
Yeah, so parallel editing will show like it can show similar things happening to characters where they're going through the same thing, or maybe that could be for comedic effect or for drama. They're all sad at once, or they're all messing up, and it's funny. Or it could be to show the contrast between the two. One's working really hard, and the other one's being very lazy. And we're just cutting between those two, showing their lives and their differences. And then because of this, what parallel editing does is it makes the audience, it encourages the audience to contrast the two images that we're seeing, two scenes, and make an assumption. And so if we were talking about the guy that's being lazy, and maybe he's not being lazy, he's just enjoying life. Maybe the other guy is just working too hard. He's a workaholic. If we didn't look at it like that, we might not come to that conclusion. Who has it better? Now we have to make that judgment and that decision based on this parallel editing we're seeing.
Yeah,
compared to just seeing a whole scene of one guy doing one thing and then a whole scene later of another guy doing one thing, we won't come to that same idea and conclusion, or at least not as quickly as you would.
I feel like it's a good way also of like introducing characters and showing their dynamics and how different they are, like you said. I feel like it's also a good way of showing themes and dualities, like that scene in The Godfather. You can show like he is one thing, but he's also another. Basically, like, yes, he's a family man, but this is also part of his life, and this is also his business and what he's involved in. And so I also feel like it can be a really powerful narrative tool as well, and even exposition tool, really, because you can also show exposition in a more dynamic way. It can be used in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, definitely. Another example I have of the misdirect is in the Bourne movie, he's talking to the cops and the cops are trying to track his number, and they're starting to head there, and they get up to the roof and they find out where the point of the call
Spoilers
was.
for one of the Jason Bourne movies. I don't remember which.
I don't remember which one this is but I do remember the scene where they find the cell phone that it's being called from, and we think they might catch him because all we're seeing is him talking on the phone and them talking back to him and then them heading out to catch him. And then there's a cell phone with a radio next to it. And so we see, oh, he's talking through a radio to the cell phone to them, and he's somewhere else. And so it was a misdirect, making us think that Jason Bourne was getting ready to get caught. And so it can be used, again, it can be used for that misdirect. Or again, it can be used for these contrasting ideas, or just to show similarities between characters or between themes. You could have, for contrasting, you could have a character saying how well off everyone is in this land, and those people, when they're pointing to poor people, they should just get a job, because then if they want to get money, they should just go earn it. And then maybe we're cutting to another scene of a guy that is actually trying to get a job, and he's getting rejected here, there, because he looks poor. He doesn't have enough money to get cleaned up and get a suit and whatever else. And so he just keeps getting rejected job after job. So it's not as easy as that one guy believed. And that contrast, that parallel editing made us see that. Vice versa, the opposite could be true. You could have a person showing and saying how poor everyone is and how horrible life is. And you're cutting between that and another scene, which is showing people in leisure, enjoying pools and vacations and entertainment, TV, video games, activities, and showing that maybe life's not as bad as this character's saying, and they're just looking at it negatively. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this, and it's a very powerful thing. And sometimes it wasn't even meant to be there, but the editor decides to make it a parallel edit, which draws a different conclusion or has us think like maybe one person's more right than the other.
I don't remember which movie it was, but there was a scene similar to where it was like this big fancy dinner party that was super boring and monotonous, but they were like thinking, oh, basically it wasn't even saying anything. It was just showing, and it was like a show don't tell moment, where it was like, okay, these people that are rich and successful and should be happy, they were miserable at a party. And meanwhile, these people that had less and they lived in they weren't like super duper poor, but they were pretty, not lower middle class, almost pretty much poor. And they were laughing and singing in the streets and like being with family, and like the contrast between the two.
Oh, there's definitely that in the Titanic.
There's that in the Titanic as well, like showing the two parallels, how it's way more fun down there.
And it's showing us, and the parallel is showing us that the main character, the girl, what's her name?
Rose.
That Rose is not really having fun at this other place, even though she should be. Well, technically she should be. And she's having more fun at this other poorer party where they're actually dancing around and drinking and doing whatever they want, compared to this richer, more
and they didn't have to tell you that. So I feel like it can also be a really good show don't tell tool to like show you a message, show you a meaning, something they're trying to tell you, without having a character spit it out.
Right. So then she doesn't have to spit out exposition as, oh, it's so much more fun down here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just we already come to that conclusion because we're seeing it. We're seeing her not be as happy in that other party. And we're seeing her be more happy in the poorer one where they're dancing and laughing and doing whatever.
Yeah.
Last thing about parallel editing is that cross-cutting is usually used interchangeably with parallel editing, but there is a technical difference. Cross-cutting, actually, let me just go to Studio Binder. Cross-cutting in film is an editing technique that cuts separate actions together to illustrate moments that take place simultaneously within the narrative structure. The rules of cross-cutting as far as their relation to scale and time are not overly strict, but the majority of cross-cuts are used to show large-scale events that occur across multiple locations. So basically the thing we're talking about this whole time. Distance of these separate locations could be rather short. For example, they could be in the same building, like we were saying with the cops getting ready to bust down the door. Maybe they're in an apartment building. Or they could be in far different planets to show the similarities or the differences between the two. The main idea is to show the viewer multiple views across different locations. So you're seeing that perspective from multiple different people's perspective. You're not seeing it from the one character. You're seeing it from multiple views. And then you're making your own judgment based on it. Parallel editing is a specific cross-cutting technique that creates a narrative parallel that the viewer may compare and contrast. For example, if one character is scrubbing toilets while the other is riding a jet ski, that's kind of like with the one I said, but the visuals will create an undeniably powerful narrative point of view through the use of editing both scenes next to each other and between. So basically, they're used interchangeably because they're almost the same thing, but there is a technical difference, and I thought I'd point that out. Parallel editing is more of a narrative tool to show those similarities or those contrasts, where cross-cutting can be just showing a big event happening from multiple people's perspectives. So maybe there's a bank heist and we're cross-cutting between it, showing the point of view of the robbers, showing the point of view of the cops, showing the point of view of the people inside, and we're cross-cutting between these different narratives simultaneously to show the whole picture, compared to parallel editing, which is trying to actually show like a narrative example of the comparison between how the cop thinks and how the robber thinks. That would be more of like a parallel editing because it's meant to say something. I guess that's the best way I can explain it. Does that make sense? All right, does anyone have any comments, questions, or anything to add for parallel editing or cross?
I was gonna say, I guess not, because no one said anything when you asked if it made sense. Guess not.
If it doesn't make sense, figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, look it up.
Definitely
Google it or
makes sense.
something.
All
He
right.
said, "Oh, good."
All right, so as I said, I just want to remind everybody again, they've got the 3 exercises. It's going to be due on the February 28th, and that's going
Yes,
to be
all of them were evil. We're giving you a lot of work. Don't have to do all of them if you can't have time.
No, I mean, just if you want to take part, those are when we're going to look at them. If you want to do them after the fact, if you can't.
I know.
get
I
time
was
by
just
then.
like, holy crap, we're giving them like 3 things. I'll do the same
Hey,
day.
I gave the first one like 3 weeks ago.
That's true.
so-
That is fair. That is very fair. That's true. The first one was
Anyway,
3 weeks ago.
The first one was the sound tool editing exercise. You're going to take a small clip, 2-3 words, and change the audio with EQ and the bass and treble and high pass filters, low pass filters, notch filters. I don't know, I had to look at them, all of them, but basically all the ones that we went over. Do a different take with each one where you're seeing what it changes and what it adjusts and how it sounds and what you might like best, and then make one final version that you use all the tools that you would like to try to make it sound as best as you'd like. If you'd like to add more bass to your voice and make it sound a little more deep, or not deep, but a little more like, I don't know, full, then that's something you might want to do, or you might want to make your voice sound less shrill or something like that. So you'll take down some of that treble. Whatever you want to do, you just edit each one differently so you can get the feel of what these different tools do. And then the last one would be the best one that you can come up with based on what you've learned. The second exercise is the editing style. And since we watched Shawshank Redemption for our exercise, a lot of it was narration. And we're going to use a clip. You can use stock footage, or you can use something you've already recorded. And it's either going to be the end of the scene, the beginning of the scene, or in between the scene. And you're just going to use narration to either end it, start the new scene, or transition between them, like Shawshank Redemption did a lot. And then this third exercise is the one I sent out in the email with the, I don't have it. Well, with the budget, with all the help if you need it, with some of the stuff explained, all the stuff that I knew anyway. And you're just going to take that scene I sent in the email and make the budget based on what you can find in your area. And the very last thing I'm going to say is what we're going to study for Monday. Monday, we're going to be going over grip equipment. There's a lot to it. Probably not going to be able to cover every single thing. I tried to get like as much as I could think of, but I'm sure there's tons out there that I don't even know about. But I tried to do the same thing we've been doing with all the other equipment. And then just tips and advice on how to create a low budget project. And that's more of for the budgeting side. If we can find maybe some ways where you can lower your budget, maybe you kick out a character, maybe you mix a character and make them 2 characters into one, so you're only paying 1 actor. Things like that we'll talk about. We'll learn some more stuff and discuss that Monday. Thanks, everybody. What? I was just looking at you. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming and for all the input and everything. And the discussion was really cool today.
Yeah, guys, it was fun.
I'm going to stop further recording here, though.